An offender or potential offender that a body had been buried in a particular place just inside a field in the plough soil.
Back in March 2011, forensic archaeologist Professor John Hunter had been called in by Wiltshire Police to search the corner of a field in this sleepy part of the Cotswolds.
Archaeologists are good at looking at changes to the landscape. They're good at identifying where things have been disturbed, where they might have been buried through vegetational change. You can use geophysics, you can use aerial photography, you can use all sorts of fancy techniques. At the end of the day, sometimes you just have to be manual, hands-on, and just remove topsoil to try and find where a buried body might be. Our work really was to try and find where the grave was. If there was a grave, and having found it, should we find it, then excavate it, follow the edges of the grave, recover the body, and recover with it all the evidence that may pertain to the person who put the body in the ground in the first place.
But locating a buried body in an area such as this is far from straightforward.
The information we got was quite limited, but that's not unusual. In our experience, when people say they've buried a body in a certain place, the chances are, because of landscape change and time and memory, it's usually not quite in that place. It's usually 10, 20, 30 metres away or in a completely different location. So if someone says there's a body here, then it may not be in that exact place.
Despite a full day of searching, frustratingly, Professor Hunter failed to locate the body.
We came back the second day, continued our small trenches by hand, using hand shovels, and then decided that it would be easier, more economical, to get a machine in. A machine with a wide bucket, about 3 foot wide, without teeth, and then just draw away the topsoil in a particular area. And the first thing we did was get this machine. We marked out an area, I think roughly about 12 by 8 metres, and systematically got the machine, and a very skilled driver, to strip off the soil at about 10 centimetres depth on each occasion.
Finally, the earth yielded the terrible discovery which John and his team had been searching for.
As the machine was skimming away carefully, it uncovered and slightly disturbed 2 bones, which looked very, very much human. And everything stopped immediately at that point. Everybody rushed in and stopped, and no one touched anything. We came in with our small hand trowels, cleared away where the bones had been disturbed. They'd actually been moved from what was eventually the grave. And then we cleared away the loose soil, recalling where it was, and then exposed more bones, clearly human, clearly in a fairly well undisturbed anatomy, and gradually, bit by bit, exposed what turned out to be a grave. It took us quite a while to excavate the body, and the first thing that was clear was that it was a very, very shallow burial. Maybe 20, 30 centimetres dug into hard rock, which would explain why it was shallow. Whoever buried the body there can't have known that it was going to be that hard to dig a body into the ground. The fact that it was close to the edge of the field, where there was deeper soil, plough soil, made it slightly easier, I suppose. But it was very obvious that the body was laid out on its back, but it wasn't all present.
The contents of the grave were as sad as they were terrible. Local TV reporter Rob Murphy visited the scene.
Only partial remains, awfully, missing her skull, her hands and her feet.
Successfully finding the body was only the first part of the investigation. The next crucial stage was identifying the victim.
many people might think, well, you've got the remains there, surely you could just get DNA from the bones. Actually, frankly, isn't that easy to get DNA from bones? You have to go through a whole process. But forensic analysis and scientists looked at it, and they were, fortunately from the investigators' point of view, they were able to get a match because the young woman was on the National DNA database.
Obviously, there are a number of reasons why people don't come home, but quite quickly it was established that this was very unusual and she'd not done it before.
Detective Superintendent Sean Memory was part of Wiltshire Police's major investigation team when Sian disappeared.
She was in a stable relationship, she had a loving family, and there was no obvious reason why she wouldn't have got home that evening. And so within a matter of hours, a major investigation was launched.
People were worried. Actually, this was clearly something different. What we knew about Sian was often we get a steer from the police about missing people. You know, often these people have gone missing before, they may have chaotic lifestyles, they might have had something in their life recently which has been has caused them to want to disappear. But the intelligence that we got straight away, none of this was the case here. This was different.
The weekend passed with no trace or word from Sian. The only clue was from her mobile phone records, which sounded even more alarm bells.
What the police told us was Sian's mobile phone was no longer pinging off the masts here in central Swindon. It was pinging off a mast in Cadley, which is in Savernake Forest, which is 10 miles away. And that's utterly frightening because she has no reason to be there.
A huge search was launched in that area, with a massive turnout from the community to assist the police.
They had people out in horses. They had the police helicopter, heat-seeking helicopter, and some police were there looking. But news grew. And by that afternoon, there were coachloads of people who had been laid on from Swindon to there. There were church groups, there were friends groups, and by that evening there were many hundreds of people who had been bussed, who either just randomly turned up or had heard about Sian being missing. You know, this had touched this town.
And while huge efforts were underway searching through 4,500 acres of forest, back in Swindon, detectives were starting to comb through the town's CCTV records. Footage of Sian leaving the nightclub is found and analysed closely.
So as Sian came out of the nightclub, she walked along the street and you could just see in the distance a car slowly pulling up alongside her, but it was out of shot of all cameras. The next shot further up the road, Sian is no longer to be seen. So there's a fairly strong inference to be drawn that she got into that vehicle, which at that point was completely unknown.
The image was not clear enough to identify the vehicle in the distance, but there were other clues the police could work from.
So one of the first things the investigation did was send it off to an expert. Could you identify from the headlights what type of make, model of vehicle that was? From that, it was established that it could be a Toyota Avensis, which obviously narrows down the type of vehicle you're looking for. And quite unusually, as the vehicle went by, you could see like a shiny sticker or similar on one of the passenger doors. Again, not particularly visible because of the quality of the camera, but quite an identifying feature. The first thoughts for the team was this a taxi? It's unusual to have a sticker, you know, sort of 2 foot by 3 foot stuck on the side of a car, but without a registration number, there were probably several hundred taxis not only working in Swindon that night, but travelling in from nearby towns.
To try and narrow down the search for the suspect vehicle further, police then called up the many hours of footage from patrol cars equipped with ANPR, automatic number plate recognition. That search led to a staggering find.
A passing patrol vehicle earlier on in the evening had passed a Toyota Avensis No offences disclosed, but it had recorded the registration number of the vehicle, which revealed Christopher Halliwell as a registered keeper.
Who was Christopher Halliwell, and might he know where Sean was?
He was a regular complainer to the police when people either run away from his taxi or he witnessed assaults or was assaulted himself. So he was in our system, so it's a complete shock that a taxi driver who we all should trust should be the main suspect.
Further digital analysis linked Halliwell's car even more closely to the last sighting of Sean on CCTV.
The next thing to think about is Sean alive? If she's alive, do you want to notify Christopher Halliwell that he's a suspect? So do you stay covert, or do you go over and arrest him? The decision made that day was to stay covert and place him under surveillance.
In the days that follow, Halliwell is observed burning the taxi-car seat covers and seemingly scouting out remote areas. Then later, he is monitored as he buys a large amount of paracetamol from a pharmacy.
So they take the decision to arrest when the surveillance team watch him buy suicide levels of tablets on the Thursday morning. That's when they strike and arrest him. We heard that a house in Ashbury Avenue, which is in a very nice suburb of Swindon, was being searched. It was clear that this was the man, he was the prime suspect, and neighbours frankly couldn't believe it. I was there doing a live report for the news that night and talking to his neighbours beforehand, and they said, he's the wrong man. Chris isn't a killer. My car breaks down, he'll fix it for me. He'd drop us to the airport. He takes my daughters to school. A man of trust. And he was the man who was the prime suspect.
Time was passing, and so were the chances of finding Sean. So, 5 days after she went missing, and with Halliwell in the hands of detectives, they used special legislation to secure information about her whereabouts.
The provisions of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act allow for an urgent interview to take place. And that's allowed to take place if there's, for instance, someone outstanding, a victim that could be saved. So that interview took place in the car park without a solicitor, without access to his rights at the police station. And over a prolonged period, close to 4 hours, Christopher Halliwell made an admission that he had killed Sian O'Callaghan and agreed to take the officers to where he had lain her body overnight. For me, it was most unusual that a murderer is going to make any admissions. Normally they want to see what evidence you've got, they want to take legal advice. So I think the team were extremely shocked that he was prepared to take them to where Sian was laying. And I guess initially they weren't sure whether that was going to be true or not, but sure enough, he took them to this deposition site in Uffington, stood looking down a bank and pointed to a spot where they could see the body of Sian O'Callaghan.
Immediately, detectives set up a crime scene around Sian's body and tried to keep Halliwell talking.
At this point, they return to the car. Halliwell is contrite. There's a convoy of police cars behind them. There's a police helicopter above. And Chris Halliwell turns and says,
"Would you like another one?" In the history of my career, this had never happened before. And do you want another one? What did that actually mean? So, of course, you're going to say, well, what have you got, Christopher?
In March 2011, a taxi driver in Swindon called Christopher Halliwell had admitted to the murders of 2 women, some 8 years apart. And he'd revealed the sites of where he had left both their bodies. One of them, Sian O'Callaghan, had been missing for a matter of days before the killer showed police where he'd left her. The other woman, Becky Godden Edwards, had been reported missing 4 years earlier by her mother, Karen. Despite a turbulent and chaotic life in the years leading up to her disappearance, Becky's early childhood had been idyllic.
She was such an angelic little girl, and I always say sugar and spice and all things nice. That was Becky, and she really was a sweet little girl. She used to giggle a lot. She always loved...
Family tried to track her down over the months and then years that followed. But despite reported sightings of Becky by various acquaintances of her family, she never returned.
Even though people had said they'd seen her, there was something inside of me just felt it wasn't right. So we went to the police station and asked whether they'd heard anything, because I thought they knew her. You know, she was known to the police, so they would know. They said, no, nothing's been flagged up.
And throughout the years that Becky didn't come home, Karen continued to buy Christmas and birthday presents for her daughter, hoping that one year she might turn up to receive them.
I didn't want her to feel that she'd been left out. And even my mum, we used to buy her Christmas presents and a birthday present. We'd write a card out, and it started accumulating. So we put them into bin bags and boxes, and we'd put them up in the loft. So when she turned up eventually, we could have given them to her, and she would know that we hadn't forgot about her, because, you know, her lifestyle was so chaotic. But she was still my daughter, and I still loved her.
And then, after 8 long years of missing her daughter, Karen saw with horror the news that the man who had murdered Sian O'Callaghan had also shown police to the grave of another woman he had killed, and Karen feared the worst. Those fears were confirmed with a visit from police.
There were 4 of them stood at the door, and I just said to him, "It's my daughter, isn't it?" And he said, Yes, can we come in?" And at that point, I remember just going absolutely hysterical. It was just like somebody just... Oh, it was just like a car crash. It was just awful. It was just awful. It's the news that nobody ever wants to hear. And I remember just screaming because I didn't want it to be Becky.
With the discovery of 2 victims, the entire community was stunned, and 2 families left utterly heartbroken. It was now down to pathologists and the use of forensics to piece together how these 2 young women had lost their lives. Becky's partial skeletal remains would not give up clues easily, but the recent deadly attack on Sian O'Callaghan would be easier to document.
So the post-mortem revealed that Sian had...
And the judge sided with Halliwell, that it wasn't admissible, that they could not show to a jury this confession. So effectively the Becky charge was dropped. They could proceed with Sian because they had DNA links with Halliwell on her body. Some of his saliva was found on her body, and there was some of Sian's blood found in his car. So he admitted Sian's murder in 2012, but the Becky charge was effectively dropped, to the horror of Karen Edwards, Becky's mum.
We were told that we weren't allowed to talk about it to anybody. The judge had put a gagging order on us, meaning that he was only going to stand trial for Sian's murder.
Sadly, there was no justice for the family of Becky. It had almost been forgotten.
And that is why, at that point, I thought, I've got to campaign now. I've got to get this case reopened.
It took 3 years, But Karen's determination paid off, and a new investigation was opened with a renewed hunt for forensic evidence to determine just who had killed Becky.
When I took over this investigation, I met with Karen Edwards and I made her a promise that I would do absolutely everything I could to bring justice for her and her family for the murder of their daughter.
In 2015, killer Christopher Halliwell had been in prison for over 2 years for the murder of Sian O'Callaghan. Now the investigation into the murder of Becky Godden Edwards had been reopened, and Detective Chief Inspector Sean Memory had been tasked with finding new evidence to convict Halliwell, the man who had previously told police where Becky's body was and who was now denying her murder. In order to be able to use Halliwell's previous conviction of murdering Sian in the trial for the murder of Becky, Sean needed to find similarities in the evidence of both murders and what the killer had done to the bodies.
So Christopher Halliwell is allocated a probation officer from Wiltshire as part of his prison rehabilitation, because even though he's sentenced to 25 years, he's still going to want to be released at some point and find some accommodation. So part of that process was he's seen by a Wiltshire probation officer. He was quite loose-lipped with her. He said a number of things to her about what had happened to Sian, which he'd not said to the police. And one of them was that he'd killed her in Ramsbury, stripped her clothes and placed the items in a pond. So we'd been in Ramsbury and we'd found lots of ponds, and we were driving back into Swindon for a meeting. We just drove along and happened to see this pond. It didn't appear on any maps, which was a bit strange. So we just stopped and we sort of tried to put ourselves in the shoes of Christopher Halliwell. Was this the sort of pond that he would have used? And as the three of us looked into the pond, right before our eyes, an object came to the surface, and we could see the heel of what looked to be a shoe or a boot. When we managed to hook the boot out and we quite clearly realised that that was the boot belonging to Sian, we then conducted a major search of this area. I think in investigations you do make your own luck, and whilst this wasn't a pond that we planned on searching, the fact that we were in here looking around at the right area, we had a bit of luck, and I wanted to be able to use the conviction of Christopher Halliwell for the murder of Sian as part of the evidence. It was much stronger to say to a jury that the man in front of you is already convicted of them. There'd be some evidence on this spade. So we sent it away for analysis. And to be honest, I was hoping maybe Becky's blood would be on it or something similar. At this point, I met Lorna Dawson, a soil expert from Scotland.
We recovered soil from several spades, a pickaxe, a fork, and pieces of tape that had been adhering to one of the questioned spades. And from all those items, we were able to recover individual sources of aggregates less than a millimetre in size and analyse those individually. What soil science applied to the criminal justice system does is try to answer the where question. So, where could that unknown soil that is on an item have come from?
Using samples of soil taken from the field around Becky's unmarked grave, Lorna returned to the laboratory to see if those samples matched the material found on Halliwell's spade.
We look at them using a macro lens, describe the colour and texture, and then under the microscope we examine them further to look for any artefacts such as pieces of vegetation, hairs or fibres that might be retained within this soil. Then we take that same sample, hand grind it, and take a portion out and extract it for the organic profile. So that's the profile that's left behind by decomposing vegetation that has grown at that location. The other portion of the aggregate is prepared for the mineralogy of that sample, so that reflects the geology, so the rocks that are underneath that soil from where that soil has developed. So we get both aspects of the soil quantified, and then we can compare that with the known samples where we know they've come from, which are called the reference samples.
I was completely blown away when she phoned to say it was so unique in that field that it matched it as close as DNA to the soil on the back of the spade.
It was quite an unusual organic profile, so not just a common grass profile or a common woodland profile. This was quite an unusual signature that we got. At that moment, it really built our confidence that it's extremely likely that those soil aggregates had come from the location where the remains were found, rather than any other location. Because indeed, in that corner of the field, as it turned out, we heard after this that the farmer he'd not used this particular corner of the field. So unusual weeds and unusual vegetation had grown there. And that's why we got this really distinctive organic profile, nowhere else in the sample database.
This evidence was the breakthrough that we needed. This basically put that spade at the deposition site. I now needed to put that spade into the hands of Christopher Halliwell and also find some other evidence to support that he was there on that night.
With physical evidence made available through forensics, Detective Superintendent Sean Memory went on to seek more proof. That proof came when his investigations discovered two key incidents which had occurred in the days around Becky's disappearance back in 2003.
Through some research, we identified that on that very night that we thought Becky had gone missing, Christopher Halliwell broke down less than a mile away from the deposition site. He'd run out of petrol. Was that poor planning on his behalf? But it placed him very close to this rural location. Furthermore, we were able to identify that on the day, later on in the afternoon, he had an emergency appointment at his doctor's. He'd gone there on a non-arranged appointment. He had broken a finger or two on his hand, and he had scratches to his face. The doctor noted that he was highly emotional and didn't have an explanation as to how these injuries had occurred. But what was interesting was Christopher Halliwell had a long history of reporting assaults, criminal damages, what he witnesses as a taxi driver. He did not come forward on this occasion to say how his injuries had occurred.
Finally, Sean had the evidence he needed to bring about the trial which Becky's mum Karen had fought so tirelessly for. The Crown Prosecution Service agreed that Halliwell now could stand trial for the second murder of Becky Godden Edwards.
So I was really confident that we could get a conviction for this, but I went to see Karen Edwards and said, look, he's been charged. That doesn't mean to say he's been convicted.
But for Karen, and indeed all those involved, there were more surprises in store.
Well, we thought we were going in the courtroom, but we didn't. And we all sat outside. Next thing we knew, he'd sacked his barristers, and they'd come out and said, he's decided to represent himself. Who does he think he is?
The trial was pure drama. Halliwell defending himself, which is unheard of in a murder trial.
Christopher Halliwell, I've no doubt, conducted a load of research whilst in prison, accessing books, material about being a lawyer. I'm sure he thought that 30 years in the bar he could do overnight at Crown Court, which actually, again, played to our strengths because as well as he thought he did, he was appalling. He questioned everybody. If you were a witness, he called you. So he called me, and I didn't know what he was going to ask me, but it was a really trivial question. He'd said that he'd picked up some drug dealers been asked to bury a bag, and he assumed that it was guns and not a body. And he basically asked me whether I thought that was true and was it plausible. For me, that was a really straightforward answer. No and no.
And the picture painted in court was he was infatuated with Becky.
But that was hard. Looking at him, stood there with that smug look on his face, knowing what he had done to my daughter. I couldn't believe it. And now here he was, cross-examining other people, trying to wiggle off the hook, saying that the police had stitched him up, that they'd planted that soil on the spade. He was questioning Lorna Dawson, who is an expert in this field.
It was a very strange situation, but thankfully there was a very good judge who kept good control of the trial, and indeed had to stop him on several occasions when he was breaching the law in the type of questions that he was asking.
It didn't take the jury long to find Christopher Halliwell guilty. I think it was 2 hours. We were surprised it was that long, actually. And he was given a whole life order. There aren't many whole life orders given in the country. I think at the time he was one of 50-odd killers in prison who will never see freedom again. But he's one of them. There's an insignificant man who did something deeply significant twice, at least.
If you have been affected by any of the issues raised in this programme, help is available online at sky.com/viewer support. Of real-life violence that some viewers may find distressing. Whenever there's a murder, it's the job of detectives to find out who the killer is and how they killed. And often it's forensic evidence which provides the clues.
The finding of his DNA wasn't just on the murder weapon, it was on a most important part of the murder weapon.
This evidence was the breakthrough that we needed.
The forensic evidence in this case was crucial.
In this series, we shine a light on how cutting-edge forensic techniques and the power of science brought the most dangerous killers to justice.
A truly horrific criminal, a monster.
It's a hammer blow. You don't know how you're going to carry on.
We'll hear how some of the most disturbing crimes were solved, thanks to the tiniest fragments of evidence.
He basically said to me, she's in the house, go and find her.
The amount of blood that was there indicated that there was a frenzied attack.
There was no reasonable explanation for them. That's why he changed his plea.
And how even the most forensically aware of killers couldn't beat the experts and hide their crimes.
The key thing about having a DNA profile is you've got probably the sharpest tool in the box.
I was so elated beforehand. We didn't have the evidence, and all of a sudden, we'd cracked it.
In this episode, police attend the scene of what appears to be an accidental house fire. Miraculously, a child survives.
Firemen came and they asked me if it was a big or a small fire, and I said it's a big fire.
But tragically, her mother does not survive, and when forensic investigators examine the scene, clues emerge that not all is as it seemed.
The burning in the bed should have been mainly remained on the top surface of the bed, but I could see burning to the left-hand side bottom of the bed.
We saw that area of the neck had not been burned.
I phoned up the detective inspector at Stevenage and I told him, we have got a murder on our hands.
This is Forensics, catching the killer. Tuesday, 4th of March, 1980.
There was a fire at the end of the bed, and I was in the bed with my mum, and I was just felt paralysed and in shock, and really wanted my mum to move and do something, but she wasn't moving. I then don't remember actually getting out of the bed, but I found out that I did get out of the bed because the milkman rescued me on the stairs. He saw smoke bellowing out of the bathroom window, the upstairs bathroom window, so he came near to the door and he heard my screams and crying, and he knocked the door down and he came and rescued me.
Amanda Wright was just 4 years old at the time when she lived in the house with her mum, 25-year-old Susan Lowson.
I just remember being on the stairs with him and him carrying me, and I remember looking down at my feet and legs, and they were all burnt and blistered, and there's like a big bubble blister on my ankle. He took me next door, and the firemen came and they asked me if it was a big or a small fire, and I said it's a big fire.
As fire services tackled the blaze, Amanda was rushed to hospital for immediate treatment to the burns on her legs. But once the flames were extinguished, what emergency crews discovered in this quiet suburban street was more sinister than just a fire.
At the time, it was mainly sort of council properties, completely residential, and it was not a bad area at all. It was actually pretty much as you see it now.
Peter Harper was a young detective constable at the time. He was about to make a shocking discovery.
What I found was the house had been not seriously damaged or internally, but the bedroom, the top floor rear bedroom, was in actual fact pretty badly burnt. And I found that there was a body of a woman actually lying in the bed. There was a few issues that I didn't particularly like, which sort of triggered me a little bit. The burning in the bed should have been mainly remained on the top surface of the bed, but I could see burning to the left-hand side bottom of the bed. The net curtain was down on the floor, and the cord that was holding the curtain up was down by the side of the bed, totally untouched by the fire. No burn or scorch marks anywhere near it, yet the main curtains were burnt and singed, which led me to think, well, that was down before I naturally in the fire.
Back in 1980, we didn't have combustion-modified furniture, which is what we have today. Everybody's sofa has a little label on it that says it's cigarette and match resistant. The reason we have these labels is because back in the 1980s, we were having significant problems where people were dropping matches and cigarettes on sofas or in rubbish bins and that sort of thing, and they were catching their sofas alight. Since then, we have combustion-modified furniture, so it changes the way fires burn. So back in 1980, fires would develop very quickly. You could easily get to flashover, which is where the entire room is on fire. You could get to that stage within a matter of a few minutes. There are certainly tests that have been done with furniture from the 1980s that flashover happens in around 4 minutes.
Away from the bedroom, Peter's search of the home continued to arouse suspicion.
I went downstairs into sort of the lounge area. There was 2 cups and 2 plates, which obviously had been used prior to the fire, and it struck me that it was 2 plates and cups that had been used by adults rather than a mother and child. there wasn't the right crockery for a 4-year-old to be drinking or eating out of. That didn't ring right to me, so I preserved that scene as a separate scene and preserved those items.
Peter's inquiries now switched to the mortuary, where a forensic pathologist was called in to examine Susan's body.
Initially, when we thought about it, could have been an intentional ploy to actually burn her on that part of the body to start with. Because one of the interesting things was when we moved her neck up away from her chest, because the head had contracted down to her chest, we moved it up, we saw that area of the neck had not been burnt. And it was within that area that we found signs of strangulation.
I realised then, obviously, my suspicions were correct. I phoned up the detective inspector at Stevenage and I told him, we have got a murder on our hands.
In March 1980, a house fire in Stevenage almost claimed the life of 4-year-old Amanda Wright. Her mother was not so lucky. 25-year-old Susan Lowson's body had been found in the burnt-out bedroom of her home. But a post-mortem examination revealed strangulation, not fire, as the cause of her death. News of the murder quickly spread.
Stevenage is divided into a number of different neighbourhoods, and people would be friendly within the neighbourhood, but you would never leave your door open in Stevenage.
Brian Todd was a detective sergeant at the time.
It was a lot of youngsters in the town. We had a bit of a drugs problem, like most towns. There was a number of burglaries to deal with. Wherever you've got drug offences, you've got burglaries and thefts and shoplifting for people to finance their drug addiction. But it was a norm.
Through a sad period, she'd married David Lowson when she was pregnant with Amanda. And unfortunately, the relationship hadn't worked all the time to a place called the Lakes in Stevenage, where they used to play in the playground. And she was always, very devoted. She wouldn't let Amanda out of her sight. And she lived on her own, so she was quite independent, although she had her parents round the corner from her, and she saw them off. And apart from that, she didn't go out much. She was a stay-at-home mum.
The Lakes was just on our doorstep, literally, so a short walk. We'd go to the park and my mum would push me on the swing, which I absolutely loved, and then we'd go to the big slide. I've got lots of nice photos of us together. Sometimes I'd be dressed up in like a ballerina outfit, pink one, and I'd be like doing little poses in the garden. She loved music, Motown, and she liked soul, and she liked pop music, David Bowie. She liked horses, she had a horse, and she loved animals. She wrote some beautiful poems that I ended up getting, which were brilliant for me. Gave me a source of strength growing up and going through my teenage years.
The deadly events in their home that night, including the fire, would have far-reaching consequences for Amanda.
She had quite serious burns on her lower legs, and back then in 1980, skin grafts were still a relatively new procedure, and a specialist surgeon was brought in from London to complete the operations. There were skin grafts taken from her thighs and they were put on her lower legs, and she was in hospital for quite some time.
I'd be in excruciating pain when they were unravelling the bandages because the blood stick to the burns and the bandage, and then when they pulled it apart it hurt so much, and I remember just hating knowing that that was going to happen, like if I was having a bath, and the smell of it as well. It had like a disinfectant smell, really strong smell, and I'd have to soak the bandages, and I'd be like, please just let me soak them for longer. I always wanted longer. I never wanted them to unravel them. But the nurses were really lovely and were like understanding and patient with me, but it wasn't nice at all.
While Amanda was undergoing painful medical care, in the mortuary, forensic pathologists were discovering more clues as to how Susan had died.
The pathologist said that there were bruises and cuts all around Susan's body. There was a ligature mark and sign of strangulation on the neck. And clearly, whoever did this was also punching and hitting Susan, consistent with the injuries over her chest and face.
Susan's body was starting to reveal some truly harrowing injuries. But the attending pathologist, Peter Venezes, had to find hard evidence of exactly what killed the young mother.
In a victim that dies from a fire, we need to be, first of all, sure that that person had died as a result of a fire, or whether they had died, but whether they were dead before the fire occurred. And to do this, we have to look at the blood. We have to look carefully internally at their air passages. If, for example, they've inhaled smoke from the fire, they will have soot within them, and it was.
So he was confident that whoever did this not only tied a ligature around the neck, but also used his hands to try and kill Susan.
But with badly injured 4-year-old Amanda unable to provide detectives with any clues, would they ever be able to find the man who murdered her mother, Susan?
I believe this was quite a shocking occurrence in what was a small and friendly and tight-knit community. And because the fire had concealed the fact that there had been a murder, the police then tried to engage the local community to catch the killer. They put out appeals in the local paper, in the Stevenage Comet, to ask and engage and ask the people if they'd seen anything, if they had noticed anything unusual. Maybe they had sat next to the killer on the way to work. Maybe they'd seen somebody coming and going from the house. There were general appeals for eyewitnesses as well as to try and find the perpetrator.
A man had been seen running away by the milkman, who was able to give a description, and over the next 48 hours Amanda was able to tell us that she'd seen the man there, that he had been shouting at her and had run off.
Young Amanda was now starting to claw back her memories of the horror in her home that morning.
And the first thing I remember was hearing the alarm going off. It was a constant bell ringing alarm from the clock. And then when I woke up, I could see that the man was at the bottom of the bed and he was getting dressed. He was sort of hurrying along, seemed in a bit of a rush. And my mum was next to me in the bed, And then suddenly, just out of nowhere, he just sort of came flying over towards my mum and grabbed her out off the bed and pulled her out. And then he was attacking my mum and strangling her, and she was near the wall and he was smacking her head against the wall. And I was just in bits. I was screaming, crying my eyes out and asking him to stop, and he said he won't stop unless I stop crying. I was so desperate to stop crying, but I couldn't. So I was in turmoil. I needed to stop crying, but at the same time what I could see in front of me was the most horrific thing I'd ever seen. And then after a while, he then stopped attacking her, but my mum was like this side of the room, and then they sort of travelled over to this side of the room near to where I was on the bed, and then he just grabbed me and got a pillow and pushed it over my face, and I just remember feeling his hands on my neck, and then I knew like I couldn't breathe, and then after a while I just wanted it all to be over with. And then after that I came round and my mum was back in bed with me, and there was a fire at the bottom of the bed, and my mum wasn't moving, she wasn't opening her eyes. And I must have lost consciousness because it went blank, and then it seemed so different when I came round to how it was like before. So, and then with my mum back in the bed with me, and the fire, and yeah, and she couldn't move, and I just wanted her to open her eyes, and I was really tempted to get my fingers and pull her eyes open, but at the same time I felt like I couldn't move, I couldn't do anything, and I was very scared.
I can't even begin to imagine the terror that she must have felt in that moment, knowing that the person who had cared for and looked after and loved her whole life was now gone. And in fact, in her 4-year-old mind, I don't think it really computed. I think she felt that if she could just wake her mother up, it would all be all right. But the fire, of course, just got bigger, and it was climbing higher and filling up the room. And I think the next thing that she recalls is being taken out of the house by a man and taken round to her neighbour's house, where she was put on a sofa, telling that man, "My mum is still inside, my mum is still in the house."
In the days that followed, forensic investigators at the crime scene were struggling to find any evidence that could identify Susan's killer.
There wasn't any blood as such, not from the suspect. You were very restricted in what you could find in those days. There was obviously, you could find fibre evidence and things like that, but when it's gone up in smoke and flames, that side of it goes out the window.
But there was one tiny shred of forensic evidence they did find, and it was one of the oldest and most trusted sciences in police forensics.
There is a procedure for getting fingerprints from items within fire scenes. Now, everybody has seen the use of what we call a squirrel brush with powder on it in order to expose fingerprints. In fire scenes, you can still use that same technique if it's something that is away from the area of burning. If it's within the area of burning, or if it's within the room of origin and is smoke-stained or sooty, there are other techniques that can be used. And one of them is to use the soot on the item itself as a developing powder. So you would brush the soot and the fingerprint self-develops with the soot.
Could the pair of mugs, originally spotted by Peter at the home, hold the murderer's prints?
We've got our own little search lab area, and we've got a drying cabinet. So I thought, well, the firemen have been around, they've been hosing everything, and it's, you know, it's damp, and so you can't fingerprint items when they're damp. So I took them back to the police station, put them in the drying cabinet, and I thought, well, I'm going to leave them there for 24 hours.
Hoping that some fingerprint evidence had been preserved, Peter's patience paid off.
I'm almost certain that I got the victim's fingerprints, and then on the other cup I found a fingerprint mark. I think it was only just the one, and that was sent.
In March 1980, forensic investigators had recovered a fingerprint at the scene of a murder. 25-year-old Susan Lowson's body had been left in her bedroom, with her 4-year-old daughter, Amanda, still alive. Then the room had been set alight, but miraculously, Amanda was rescued. Now, police had a suspect whose print matched one found in the victim's house.
This is the police station that John Dickinson was brought to. In 1980, he would have been brought in to the cell block. He was held there for several days of interviews. The interview room where he was interviewed was upstairs on the other side of the upper windows, which was the CID office, and the interview rooms at the side. He did 4 interviews. The first one, he denied he'd ever been to 13 Cole Street Close, and that he didn't know, other than a very brief meeting 2 years before, he didn't know Susan Lowson. The second one, he admitted he was there, and that they had, he was there for the purpose of trying to get lodgings, that they got on well together. According to him, they had sexual intercourse, and about 2 o'clock in the morning there was a knocking on the door, and a man apparently arrived that he didn't see, but he didn't want any aggravation. When Susan went downstairs to let him in, he escaped round the back door. Absolute lies.
This was just one version of events told by Dickinson, but he changed his story several times, including one where he claimed to be just a burglar who set fire to the house to hide evidence of his break-in. With his fingerprint placing him at Susan's home and the clear...
There was a trial of over 2 weeks, and the jury only took 40 minutes to see through his lies and find him guilty of murder, of arson with intent to endanger life, and for which he received a life sentence, a minimum of 18 years.
But who was John Dickinson? And why had he murdered Susan on the night of the 4th of March, 1980?
John Dickinson had been living up in Newcastle until he was actually imprisoned for an arson up there. John came to live in Stevenage, where his parents lived. So as far as we know, he was chucked out by his wife and needed to find a place for that night. He turned up at Susan's house.
Susan and Dickinson only met each other once previously, which was 2 years prior to the offence, when Dickinson had been at a house when Susan visited someone else. He may have waved at her in the street a couple of times when he saw her, but he became aware through other friends that Susan was looking for a lodger, although Susan made it clear, according to him, on the evening that she only usually took ladies in, not men.
I think he had his suitcase with him, My mum was like, well, we'll have to organise that.
No avail. So they called police to go out to her mobile home for a welfare check.
Walking up to the trailer, the officers don't immediately see any cause for concern.
There was no broken glass, there were no open doors, anything like that that would alarm them.
Carla, are you in there? Miss Lomax, are you in there?
When no one answers, the officers track down the property manager to unlock the door.
They go inside, announce themselves. This is police. Anybody here? Still no answer.
The officers look around the sparsely furnished living room.
It's so empty, it looks like no one really lives there.
But that doesn't mean no one's home.
We got a body.
As the officers enter the bedroom, they discover a body of a Black female laying on the floor.
Their face and head is completely covered with a jacket.
But her identity is all it conceals.
The jacket isn't covering up the fact that there's a pool of blood.
DeCarla Lomax had come to Atlanta in 2006 from the small town of Abbeville, South Carolina.
She was a hard worker, somebody who was always striving to better herself.
Moving to Atlanta, it's the land of opportunities, especially for young Black professionals.
However, DeCarla wasn't just looking to better herself. She was building a future for her family.
She was a single mother of 3. By 2011, her 2 older children had already left home, but she was still raising her 16-year-old son.
Being a single mother, raising a 16-year-old son has to be challenging.
Did you finish your homework?
Yes, Mom.
Are you sure?
Positive.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
How much do I involve myself in his life? How do I make sure that he's safe? Keep him on track with his grades. There are so many dynamics that go into raising a teenager.
Once you finish your breakfast, if you want me to give you a ride to school on my way to work, I can do that.
Okay.
And DeCarla was doing it while working full-time as a certified nursing assistant.
It takes a special nature, a special spirit and personality to be in healthcare. That is a person who really does have a compassionate heart.
DeCarla was a caregiver at heart, a nurturer at heart. She dedicated her entire life to helping other people.
DeCarla was also taking college classes to get her degree as a licensed practical nurse.
She was always looking for opportunities to better herself, and there's much more money to be an LPN.
Being able to work and go to school, that is a lot of responsibility, but that says a lot about her work ethic.
Still, for all her success as a nurse and a mother, DeCarla felt something was missing in her life.
It's natural progression to say, hey, I have my things in order. Let's see if I can get me a companion that I can share this with.
She found that companion in Deron Williams.
She found someone who not only she was attracted to, but someone who also loved her son.
Got a really great deal with it.
Oh, thank you.
It wasn't long before Deron moved in with DeCarla and her son.
Things were moving fast.
They quickly became a happy family.
And by 2011, DeCarla's career was on the fast track too.
DeCarla had recently graduated with her LPN.
Once she got her certificate to be an LPN, the world of opportunities just opened up for her.
DeCarla, Deron, and her teenage son are going to be able to afford a bigger house. They're going to be moving out of the trailer park.
But now police have found a woman lying on the floor of DeCarla's trailer in a pool of blood.
There's no pulse, no response, and it's clear that this person is deceased.
She had what we call impact wounds, blunt, force wounds that caused severe damage.
She was hit so hard that her face was almost unrecognizable.
is the dead woman, DeCarla.
When the family requested a welfare check, they provided the police with a description.
She had a very distinct tattoo in Georgia to build a better life for herself and her teenage son.
DeCarla is a small-town girl from South Carolina who moves to the Atlanta, Georgia area for better opportunities.
While working as a nursing assistant, she took classes at a local college. She earned her certification as a licensed practical nurse.
She'd also found love with Deron Williams.
DeCarla found someone that she thought would complement her life.
Things were just looking great for her.
Police department. DeCarla, you in here?
But now police officers performing a welfare check
We got a body.
have found a woman's dead body on DeCarla's bedroom floor.
Go check for that tattoo.
Judging from the tattoo on the lower back, the body appears to be DeCarla's.
It also appears she had been beaten to death.
Go ahead and start major crimes this way, please.
She had massive blunt force trauma to her face and her head.
It's down this hallway.
When homicide detectives arrive on the scene, they search the trailer for a possible murder weapon.
With that type of massive blunt force trauma, it had to be something heavy.
Whatever was used had to be covered in blood.
However, there's no sign of it in the trailer.
They do see some tools laid out on the counter.
But there was nothing heavy enough to inflict the sort of injuries DeCarla suffered.
There's also no evidence of forced entry or any sort of struggle between DeCarla and her killer.
It looks like it might have just been a sudden strike that put DeCarla down.
Why the killer struck is more difficult to determine.
The police are not sure if it was a robbery gone wrong.
The trailer, it was almost empty. There was hardly any furniture in there.
It looked like someone had been there packing and moving.
So it's really hard to determine if anything was actually taken from the property.
However, the detectives have reason to suspect DeCarla knew her killer.
Not only was there no evidence of forced entry, when the first officers who arrived on scene found DeCarla, there was a jacket covering her face and head.
But when someone takes the time to cover up an assault, use an indicator that that person is known to the victim.
Excuse me, sir.
After wrapping things up inside, detectives start interviewing other residents in the trailer park.
Most of the neighbors weren't too familiar with DeCarla. Some would see her come and go, but they didn't get to know her that well.
We're investigating a homicide.
One neighbor does confirm that DeCarla was in the process of moving out.
Yeah, I've seen her around. She's been coming by for the last week or so, loading things up.
That explains why there was so little furniture and other belongings in the trailer.
When was the last time you saw her?
The neighbor says the last time he saw DeCarla was that morning.
That neighbor remembered DeCarla pulling in around 8:30.
She's getting out of her car, went inside.
Huh. Was anyone with her?
I hadn't seen anyone.
However, the neighbor's story leaves detectives with another question.
The car is no longer there at the trailer.
Do you see anyone leave?
No. Next time I looked out was when the police came.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you, sir.
Assuming that the killer made off with DeCarla's car, detectives pay a visit to the trailer park's management office.
They asked the management office if there's any security footage.
As you can see right here, this shows the car coming into the property.
Reviewing the footage, detectives note that DeCarla arrived at the trailer park at 8:45 a.m.
And about 20 minutes later, they saw DeCarla's car coming back out of the trailer park.
And whoever was driving appeared to be in a hurry.
They could not ascertain from the video who exactly was driving, but they knew that it wasn't her.
By then, DeCarla was lying dead inside the trailer.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
But if it wasn't DeCarla, who was it? As detectives leave the management office, they're approached by another of DeCarla's neighbors.
Excuse me. Are you the ones asking about DeCarla?
Yes, ma'am.
The neighbor tells detectives that she's seen two different men at the trailer with DeCarla recently.
Well, she had a boyfriend that lived with her.
Do you know his name?
Duran Williams.
She would often see DeCarla with Duran around the trailer. But she did mention that she had seen DeCarla with another man.
The neighbor says the man's name is Raymond Harvey.
She also tells the police that she often saw DeCarla arguing with this man.
And so with this new information, police are thinking, is he possibly the killer?
Detectives investigating the murder of DeCarla Lomax have just learned that the 36-year-old nurse had recently been seen with a man named Raymond Harvey.
Raymond has also been reported by neighbors to have been arguing with DeCarla around the property multiple times.
Officers are now thinking that one of these arguments turned violent.
Based on the crime scene, detectives already suspect the killer was no stranger.
The fact that her body was covered with that jacket is an indication that this person was known to DeCarla.
But who exactly is Raymond?
Protocol is always to run a background check.
He does have some criminal history. He had been arrested for fraud charges.
But there's nothing in his past to suggest he's capable of such a brutal murder.
He doesn't have any violent crimes on his record.
But they still want to talk to Raymond to get the nature of that relationship.
Detectives bring Raymond in for questioning and tell him exactly why he's there.
We found an adult black female deceased with obvious injuries.
He's listening to the officers, very matter of fact.
He was non-emotional.
We have positively identified that person as DeCarla.
Is he just nonchalant, or is he trying to play it cool because he already knows that she's dead?
When detectives ask how he knows DeCarla, Raymond says that he's her boyfriend.
He said that she had recently broken things off with her previous boyfriend, Duran Williams.
He also tells detectives that there was some overlap between his relationship and DeCarla's relationship with Duran.
And how did y'all meet?
She came to South Carolina on a business. She came to one of her cousin's house, so I was in her cousin's house.
When he saw her, he told the cousin immediately, hey, who's that? I like her. Can you hook me up?
Raymond says that's when he and DeCarla had begun a long-distance relationship. But she continued to see Duran, too.
When things were great with Duran, he would stay with her. And then when they weren't so great, she would call Raymond.
But he says that DeCarla eventually said she was tired of the back and forth.
She had told me on the phone, she said, look, she don't do a long-distance relationship, so I really want to be with her, and I'm to Atlanta.
Raymond says he'd moved to Atlanta to stay with DeCarla.
And this time, DeCarla told him that she and Duran had broken up for good.
But according to Raymond, Duran wasn't entirely out of the picture.
He fell out, because, cheating incident, moved back home.
Cheating with him?
Yeah, she was cheating with him.
Not that Raymond was entirely innocent either.
I was doing my thing, too.
DeCarla wasn't his only love interest?
But he and DeCarla had eventually drifted back together.
Only when he moved back into DeCarla's trailer, things got even more complicated.
Duran was actually there now, staying at the trailer.
DeCarla says that she's just helping him out.
He had gave them her address for his probation.
Raymond says he wasn't crazy about the arrangement, but DeCarla had told him not to worry.
She said he's not going to do nothing to say nothing to you because he knows he's on probation. He knows he's in trouble. He's gone for a while.
Still, Raymond said he didn't like having Duran around.
In fact, he says Duran is likely responsible for DeCarla's death.
Even before me, they were arguing and fighting. It was real bad.
He tells the police about how Duran had beaten her several times before, and one of those beatings actually landed her in the hospital.
I wasn't cut, physically, like punched her in the face or something, swollen up.
Raymond says he'd grown so fed up with the situation that he'd given DeCarla an ultimatum.
He says it's either him or me.
Yeah, look, DeCarla, you finna have to choose.
I don't...
See, really, I'm done, bro.
Wait, please don't go, please. I choose you. I choose you, I want you.
Really?
Yes, I want you.
DeCarla says, I want you, Raymond. I want you.
So Raymond and DeCarla decided to get their own place.
We had to move the majority of our things to the new residence.
Which explains why the trailer was so empty.
Raymond says that Duran had also moved out.
His mama, got him, several places to stay.
But did that mean he was entirely out of the picture this time?
DeCarla would often go back to the mobile home to pick up a few things.
There were nights where DeCarla stayed overnight just from packing late.
At least that's what she'd told Raymond.
The detectives asked Raymond if DeCarla might have still been seeing Duran.
Might have been up there, I don't know.
Raymond said they had had a conversation about this very fact.
But it's what he says next that makes detectives suspicious of Raymond.
She said that he never did come, but you don't have to be
Raymond's responses during the interview were making detectives more than a little suspicious.
He was nonchalant about the whole situation.
But there is one thing Raymond says that really sticks out to detectives.
They asked Raymond if he thought DeCarla was still hooking up with her ex, Duran, behind his back.
That's when Raymond tells detectives, I don't know, but all women lie.
That says a lot about his trust of DeCarla and his overall thought process of how women are in general. So that is a major red flag to detectives.
Had he followed DeCarla to the trailer, hoping to catch them in the act?
Possibly that's the motive. That there was jealousy going on, there was a heated argument that turned violent.
Probing for his whereabouts around the time of the murder, detectives ask when he last saw DeCarla.
She stayed with me last night.
Raymond told detectives that DeCarla had left early in the morning.
She was supposed to take her son to school and then go by the mobile home to pick up a few things.
She's gonna be over there getting things situated for a while.
But when they ask if he'd gone to the trailer that morning, he says no.
Raymond's alibi is that he walked DeCarla's sister's kids to school that morning because they were staying with him at the time.
It's been right in the back of our place, town.
Raymond told detectives he had texted her and called her and received no response.
He was wondering where she was.
It was at this point where Raymond began to demonstrate some behavior not consistent with his earlier attitude when officers told him that she was deceased.
At first, he was flat, he was robotic, and at the end of questioning, he became really emotional.
He starts breaking down. He's like, I told her. but she didn't listen.
Detectives didn't know what to make of that.
Is the reality that DeCarla is dead finally sinking in?
Or is it the beginnings of a confession?
He could be getting emotional because he's feeling guilty.
I'm gonna need your phone to check your call logs, please.
At the end of the interview, detectives asked to see Raymond's phone.
His statements in his call log was consistent. He had made several attempts to reach out and call her.
To investigate Raymond's claims further, detectives subpoena his phone records.
Since he made several texts and calls, there should be cell tower data that confirms exactly where he was.
Then, while waiting to hear back from Raymond's cell phone provider,
You can have a seat here.
detectives talked to DeCarla's 16-year-old son.
They reached out to DeCarla's brother, who picked him up from school, and asked him to bring the teenager into the station.
Thank you.
When he sits down with detectives, DeCarla's son confirms that his mother did drive him to school that morning.
He tells them that he slept most of the way to school, but she did, in fact, drop him off at school.
His story was consistent with Raymond.
However, he does mention something that Raymond didn't know.
He remembers his mother saying on the ride to school that she was going to meet up with Duran a little bit later.
She said Duran needed a ride to the probation office.
Okay. All right.
He had a meeting that morning with his parole officer.
Considering how Raymond felt about Duran, it's no surprise that DeCarla did not tell him that she was meeting with Duran.
Sir, can you come in, please? I'm gonna ask your uncle some questions. You can sit.
She also neglected to mention it to her brother.
You can have a seat, please.
Since DeCarla's brother was already at the station, detectives interviewed him too.
Did she tell you anything about meeting up with him at school?
DeCarla's brother is really surprised that DeCarla went to go see Duran without him.
But she knows she won't be around him. She usually brings me along with her because we already know how he is.
According to DeCarla's brother, how Duran is dangerous.
He tells the police that DeCarla and Duran had a very violent history, and they had made an agreement that anytime DeCarla was going to interact with Duran, that her brother needed to be there as well.
He says they'd made the agreement after Duran put DeCarla in the hospital.
Raymond had previously told detectives about Duran putting DeCarla in the hospital, but he hadn't known of any details.
However, her brother does.
DeCarla's brother actually witnessed the aftermath.
I took her to the emergency room, and after she had told me what happened.
What Duran had done sounded awfully familiar to the detectives.
Duran actually hit her in the head with a hammer.
That the 36-year-old nurse had previously been the victim of a similar attack at the hands of her ex-boyfriend, Duran Williams.
He tells the police that the incident that landed DeCarla in the hospital was due to Duran hitting her in the head with a hammer.
When was that?
This was back in 2009 or 2008.
He didn't see her get hit with the hammer, but he came home, saw his sister in her room crying.
What the hell? DeCarla, what's going on?
And saw Duran sitting across from her.
He was sitting in a chair trying to, apologize and talk to her or something.
DeCarla's brother says he didn't know exactly what Duran had done until later, after he drove his sister to the emergency room.
She told me that she had him in there fussing with her, yelling and cussing, running back and forth.
Where you was at last night?
What are you talking about?
How you gonna go out with Raymond and we doing what we doing?
So he left out the room the second time. And when he came back in the room running out. He hit her on the head with a hammer.
Her brother suspects that maybe something similar happened in this instance as well.
Her being hit in the head with a hammer. In previous offenses, makes him think Duran could be the one who did the same thing twice.
Thank you for your time. I'll see you out.
After talking with DeCarla's brother, detectives pulled Duran's criminal history and confirmed that he'd been charged for the attack that put DeCarla in the hospital.
They find that he's actually on probation for the assault charge.
He did plead guilty to assaulting her with a hammer.
Despite that, DeCarla hadn't made a clean break with Duran.
She let him stay at the trailer while he was on probation for the assault that put her in the hospital.
I can imagine him saying, well, if you wouldn't have made me so mad, then I wouldn't have caught this charge. And so she's feeling guilty.
Based on what detectives have learned, Duran becomes the focus of the investigation.
Police contact his parole officer in an effort to locate him.
The parole officer confirmed what DeCarla's son told them, that he was supposed to meet with Duran on the morning of the murder.
But Duran had missed the meeting.
The probation office also tells detectives that it is DeCarla who usually brings him there.
Between the parole officer, DeCarla's son, and her brother, the detectives are able to give DeCarla's parents a better picture of what happened when they arrive at the station later that day.
They have driven all the way to Cobb County upon hearing the news.
Apparently, she still had some association with Duran. Something about he was supposed to go to a probation office this morning that DeCarla was going to take. We don't know what the reason is behind it, other than there was an argument probably. But I know that it was a violent death.
Her parents, of course, were devastated, but they weren't really surprised. They had warned her on numerous occasions.
You know, anytime a person hits you, you know, it's time to walk away.
But love doesn't work that way. Sometimes people stay. They stay too long.
And now there was only one thing left to do.
We're going to work and work and work and work and try to bring some justice to it.
We're so sorry for your loss. Thank you for coming in. I'll see you all out.
For the investigators, the path to justice starts with locating Duran Williams.
They put out an all points bulletin for him to be located.
Detectives also issue a be on the lookout alert for DeCarla's car.
Based on surveillance video from the trailer park, detectives determined that Duran fled in DeCarla's car.
The bolo quickly gets results.
Atlanta PD contacts the detectives to let them know that they've located DeCarla's car.
It had been abandoned. The wheels were stolen and there was no sign of Duran.
There was no indication a crime had occurred in the vehicle. They had no murder weapon.
Their best chance of locating Duran turns out to be a bust.
Detectives are preparing for a manhunt because they don't know where Duran is.
However, the search for Duran will soon be cut short.
Homicide.
Then out of the blue, they hear from Duran's sister.
Duran's sister tells the investigators that she's heard something very disturbing.
I got a call from my mother who was hysterical.
According to the sister, she had very good reason to be.
She said that my brother had accidentally killed his girlfriend.
Has reached out to detectives investigating DeCarla Lomax's murder with some crucial information.
She says that Duran called their mother to tell their mother that he thinks he killed his girlfriend.
So I called his cell phone and he answered the phone. He was crying. He was hysterical. He says, I accidentally killed her. I killed her.
He tells her that he did kill DeCarla, but he doesn't know what happened.
They had a very tumultuous relationship.
His sister claims that they've been calling police on each other for years.
He's gone to jail before for, I guess domestic violence with her. It's just been a complete mess.
And then, according to Duran's sister, he was holed up in an Atlanta hotel trying to figure out what to do.
The sister feels that it's best to contact the police.
Duran's sister was able to provide the location of the hotel where Duran was staying.
Thank you.
As soon as detectives are off the phone with Duran's sister, law enforcement descends on the hotel.
Thankfully, Duran surrenders without further incident.
Then, once he's back at the station, detectives sit him down for questioning.
When they let him know that he was under arrest for murdering DeCarla, he became quite emotional.
We identified positively DeCarla Lomax as being deceased. I know, son. I know.
He's distraught, and they're having a hard time calming him down.
You all right?
That display of emotion led detectives to believe that he was feeling guilty and would cooperate.
This is your opportunity to provide us with your side of what happened.
But Duran is unable to give them a straight answer.
I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened.
Detectives want to know why then he caught his mom crying.
If I remember right, what you told her was that you thought you accidentally killed your girlfriend.
That's when Duran decides to lawyer up.
My mom told me not to talk to nobody.
Well, I understand why your mama would say that. And we've been through your rights. If you don't want to talk to me, then that's your right.
She just told me to do it with my lawyer.
So the police have to shut that interview down.
But detectives won't need a confession to charge Duran with murder.
They want to triangulate where that cell phone was.
His phone records show that Duran was in the vicinity of the trailer park the morning of the murder, right around the time of 8:45.
When Duran goes on trial on November 5th, 2012, the prosecutors say there's a simple explanation for why his phone was pinging off a tower near the trailer.
Prosecutors told the jury that DeCarla picked up Duran that morning to take him to his probation meeting, but they made a stop at the mobile home.
They stopped off at the trailer, and at some point, an argument ensued.
The prosecutors weren't sure exactly what the argument was about.
They only know what happened next.
He lost it. He lost his cool.
He picked up the hammer and murdered DeCarla.
Because unlike the previous attack, he hit her more than once.
This definitely was a fit of rage from Duran.
It wasn't until after multiple blows from the hammer that Duran realized DeCarla was dead.
I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
After the murder, he covered her face with a jacket.
Then he got in DeCarla's car and drove away, taking the hammer with him.
Somewhere he ditched that hammer.
It was never found.
When it's the defense's turn, Duran decides it's finally time to tell his side of the story.
Duran takes the stand, which is something you hardly ever see murder defendants do.
In his testimony, he doesn't deny much of what the prosecutors claim.
He tells the jury that DeCarla did, in fact, pick him up to take him to his probation meeting.
They stopped at the trailer to do some last-minute packing. And in the process, they got into an argument.
But Duran claims that DeCarla started it.
Duran said the argument started because DeCarla accused him of texting another woman.
Who is she? Just don't worry about it.
Duran says he tried to explain, but DeCarla wouldn't listen.
He states that she actually came at him
Just stop.
Who is she?
It's nobody.
He picked up the hammer to swing at her just to get her off of him.
Who is she?
It's nobody.
He was defending himself.
That's what Duran claims. But the jury sees it differently.
The jury sides with the prosecution and they find Duran guilty.
He was sentenced to life with no possibility of parole.
To those who love DeCarla, the punishment is tragically too late.
The initial 2008 charge where he had hit her with a hammer, he received no jail time. He was on probation for that assault when he killed her.
If Duran had been behind bars, DeCarla would still be alive.
Having DeCarla taken away from this world in such a violent way was a huge loss. She was caring. She committed her life to taking care of others.
And it may have been her commitment to helping Duran, even when she knew it was over between them, that cost her her life.
For whatever reason, whether it was love or even misguided love, she allowed herself to stay in that.
20-year-old Deborah Brown breaks out of her shell when she meets a smooth-talking charmer on the streets of Waukegan, Illinois.
She was hoping to be loved and willing to make such a huge sacrifice for that.
But when her man's twisted perversion sent him running from police, Deborah willingly tags along and helps bring his monstrous fantasies to life.
The horror and the trail of terror that they left behind left a cloud over communities.
Alton and Deborah were as evil as any couple could be.
And later, in Wilmington, Delaware, 17-year-old Shakira Wanham thinks her days of being used and abused are over when she meets handsome bachelor Stephen Martin.
He would treat her like a queen. She wanted it to last.
Only to find herself pulled into a world more dangerous than she could ever imagine.
They got her high and put a gun in her purse, and he said, "I need money."
She closed her eyes, the next thing you know, the gun was going off because she wanted to hold on to them.
Growing up in the quiet suburbs of Waukegan, Illinois, young Deborah Brown certainly didn't seem marked for notoriety.
What we know about Deborah is that she was a very shy young woman growing up. Her mom characterized her as a good girl.
2 years removed from high school, the sweet and unassuming Deborah still lives at home, along with her 10 siblings.
This was a very young woman who came from a very large family, a lot of kids. And when you have so many siblings, it's just so easy to get lost in the sauce.
But Deborah's humdrum world is spun upside down one fall day when she meets neighborhood ladies' man, Alton Coleman.
Alton Coleman was charming. He was very easy to talk to. He could carry on a conversation, and people just trusted him.
Deborah is instantly taken with Alton's charismatic personality. The self-described professional poker player seems to hypnotize her.
I think she's like any other young woman who meets a young man and who sees in him what she thinks that she's been wanting all her life.
Romance quickly blossoms between the two, and after a few weeks of dating, Alton asks Deborah to live with him in the house he shares with his grandmother. But Alton's offer comes with an interesting string attached, a job in the home that keeps her removed from the outside world.
She was paid $25 a month to basically be a nurse's aide to Alton's grandmother.
A place in Alton's life is worth its weight in gold.
She would cook, clean, and do chores around the house.
It gave her a sense of belonging, and I think that's why Deborah helped him.
This was probably the first person that she felt actually needed her.
For the next few months, Deborah lives a charmed life under Alton's spell. Until one day when Alton receives a court summons and reveals to Deborah a shocking secret.
Alton, hey, baby, what is this?
He was awaiting trial on a sexual assault of a 14-year-old girl.
There were 6 different sexual violent offenses on record that Alton was engaged in prior to her meeting him.
Don't worry about it, we good.
It was well known in the neighborhood that Alton grew up that his mother was a prostitute, and she would often engage in sex with her Johns in front of this young boy.
Despite Alton's predatory past, Deborah dutifully stands by her man when he asks her to accompany him to court the following week.
Deborah knew that he was going to court on a rape charge. It would be the normal thing to do if the man that you loved had committed rapes of very young girls, that you would leave. But in Deborah's case, she did not.
The night before his scheduled court appearance, Alton is nowhere to be found. And when Alton finally shows up the next morning,
He told her he had done something wrong that night.
She asked him what it was, and he wouldn't tell her.
after dropping the subject, an hour later, Deborah stands by Alton as he makes a pre-trial plea of not guilty to the rape charge.
It definitely was not enough to make her walk away.
Alton returns home with Deborah only to vanish once again. Left to care for his grandmother, Deborah gets a surprise visit. Law enforcement are looking for Alton Coleman, their prime suspect in the disappearance of 9-year-old Vernita Wheat. 6 weeks earlier, Alton had befriended the young girl's mother, Adrian, in nearby Kenosha.
He was riding a bicycle through the alley. He smiled at her, they struck up a conversation, and over the next month, he would come from Waukegan to Kenosha to visit her.
It appears that having a home life with Deborah hasn't stopped Alton from playing the field.
Vernita's mother was single. He was helpful, he ran errands for him, and he was just generally being nice to her and Vernita.
He used an alias and gained her trust by starting to date her. She believed that it was okay for Vernita to be with him and felt safe with that.
Then, 6 weeks later, on the night before his court date, Alton asked Adrian if he could take little Vernita out for some fun. She had no idea he had a history of sexual violence against children.
She gave Alton permission to take Vernita to a carnival, and she never came home.
Less than 24 hours after Vernita is reported missing, her mother goes to the police station in Waukegan to look at photos of known sex offenders. She immediately picks out Alton's mugshot from the lineup.
I think we all feared that she had been killed.
Later that morning, investigators show up at Deborah's door.
She provided us a statement that Alton had told her he had done something wrong.
She was candid, and she openly talked about it.
Believing they've gotten all they can from Deborah, the authorities leave, with the promise of returning to talk to her more at a later date. But law enforcement will never get that chance, because Alton will soon return to pick up something valuable he left behind. Deborah.
A woman with her wits about her would say, oh my goodness, there's something wrong here, and leave. But in her case, she still hoped that she would have a happy life with him.
As she follows Alton in what she hopes will be a path to a new life together, Deborah will prove the lengths that she's willing to go for her man.
There's no way that she could imagine what he was capable of and what she was capable of.
50 miles north of Chicago, in the town of Waukegan, Illinois, 20-year-old Deborah Brown has stood by her man of 10 months, 28-year-old sexual predator, Alton Coleman.
When he met Deborah, he was waiting trial on a sexual assault of a 14-year-old girl.
There was something in Alton that she connected with that made her decide that it was worth being with him.
But after being named the prime suspect in the disappearance of 9-year-old Vernita Wheat, Alton goes on the run. Less than 48 hours after taking off, Alton calls Deborah.
Hey, baby.
He has stolen a car and is about to leave town.
What?
And he wants Deborah to go with him.
Alton was able to convince Deborah that he needed her to get away from the police. I think it was easier for Alton to escape capture by having a female with him.
She compartmentalizes his very dangerous character so that she can continue to love him and be with him.
The two hit the road and head south, trying to keep one step ahead of the law.
She had not traveled much or been out of her local area. But as long as she had him, I think she was okay with being in a new place.
But law enforcement is hot on their trail.
This became a nationwide manhunt, even to the point that the FBI placed Alton on a special most wanted list.
After a week on the run, the fugitive couple abandons their stolen vehicle in Gary, Indiana, 72 miles south of Waukegan. But they can't outrun Alton's twisted compulsion when he sees two little girls walking alone.
Alton asked Deborah to help him do something wrong. And then he told her to tell the little girls that she had some clothes for them.
Having Deborah approach them first reduced the level of suspicion for the girls.
Deborah approaches 7-year-old Tamika and 9-year-old Annie.
Deborah said to the little girls, "I have some clothes for you. Would you like them?" And they said yes. And so then they walked a little ways toward a park. And then all of a sudden, Alton grabbed the one little girl, tore her clothes off, and told Deborah to hold the other little girl.
Deborah follows her man's orders.
With the fabric from the shirt, they created ties so that they can gag the girls and tie the girls up.
Alton and Deborah forced the girls to perform unspeakable acts on them before savagely assaulting the 9-year-old Annie.
Alton raped Annie, strangled her, and left her there. And then he asked Deborah to hold the feet of the little girl. Then he strangled her too. And then they just walked away.
After eagerly obeying her man's every command, Deborah has crossed an unforgivable line. She has become a sexual predator and child killer.
The fact that Deborah helped hold their legs down while he did this says to me that at this point she had completely bought into him. Alton was not holding a gun to Deborah's head.
It is a true partnership. And now, finally, she can say she is a special person. She stands out. And she is an equal to this man who she really loves.
Miraculously, Annie survives the brutal assault and is found by a passerby later that day. She directs him to 7-year-old Tamika's body. By now, every law enforcement agency in Indiana is aware of the fugitive couple. When authorities show Annie their photos, she is able to identify Alton from his mugshot. Meanwhile, Deborah and Alton are desperate to stay one step ahead of the law.
They were on the run, and they needed money, they needed transportation.
One day after their attack on the little girls, Deborah and Alton are still in Gary, looking for a vehicle to steal to get them out of the city. That's when they spot 25-year-old Donna Williams by her car.
The thing is, my man...
Alton and Deborah befriended Donna under the guise of wanting to be closer to God, and they used Donna's faith to lure her.
Excited to have made new friends, Donna offers Deborah and Alton a ride to a church function. Once in the car, Alton and Deborah strike. Deborah takes control of the wheel, allowing Alton to ruthlessly force himself on Donna.
Hurry up! The longer this killing spree goes on, the more invincible Deborah and Alton are feeling. And as part of that, the more addicted they are to this very horrific behavior.
After Alton rapes her, he wraps his hands around Donna's neck and watches as the life is suffocated out of her.
The ability to be even more gruesome and violent translates into excitement. It translates into kind of getting off on what she was doing.
As they make their way out of town in Donna's car, the pair dump her lifeless body near an abandoned building. Despite the nationwide manhunt, Deborah and Alton managed to stay under the radar and travel undetected for the next 40 days.
They stole many, many cars along the way. They would always take the license plate off before they abandoned them. So it'd take a while for the police to trace them.
The longer the two are on the loose, the bigger the body count.
I think after they had killed several people that they were enjoying the Bonnie and Clyde type murder spree that they were going on.
For Deborah and Alton, getting involved in these grisly murders and rapes became sort of like the new normal for them. They needed to step up the game in order to feel that satisfaction and pleasure. They needed more of that thrill killing in order to really feel good.
Later that summer in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the devastating fate of 9-year-old Vernita Wheat finally comes to light.
Vernita Wheat's body was discovered in the abandoned building about 3 weeks after we last knew of Alton and Deborah Brown's location.
And in her pocket was the torn ticket for the carnival, identifying it back to the carnival she had attended.
The cause of death was strangulation.
When you have to handle the crime scene of a young child, is probably the worst thing you could ever do as a police officer.
Investigators find Alton's fingerprints on items near Vernita's body. But as evil as Alton was on his own, authorities know now he's even more dangerous with his willing accomplice at his side.
I have to believe that at that time, Deborah was actually enjoying what was happening.
Deborah Brown could have gotten away at any time she wanted to.
But instead, she joins Alton as they ride through a peaceful suburb in Ohio where their savagery sees no bounds.
It was really unimaginable, the level of horror that the two of them were able to inflict.
And later in Wilmington, Delaware, 17-year-old Shakira Wanham puts herself in a deadly situation for the love of an older man.
Shakira's intentions was to rob someone. She didn't mean to shoot someone. Shooting a gun was the last thing Shakira ever dreamed of doing.
She was afraid that something would happen to her or her family if she did not do what she was told to do.
Deborah Brown and Alton Coleman are on a rape and murder spree across the Midwest. As eyewitness accounts and mounting evidence put to rest any illusion that Deborah is anything but a willing participant.
Prior to meeting Alton, you see no signal or no indication of any behavior anywhere close to what you see Deborah performing at this point. She was all in, no question about it.
Alton has all of his perverse, murderous, and sexual needs met, while Deborah is able to fill a very special role.
After almost 7 weeks on the run, Deborah and Alton find themselves low on funds as they prowl through a suburb in Ohio when they see a for sale sign for a camper. The owners, 50-year-old Harry Walters, and his wife, 45-year-old Marlene, welcome Deborah and Alton inside.
When they stepped inside the home, the Walters were pretty excited for having a potential buyer. I'm sure they were very hospitable.
Alton and Deborah prepare to pounce.
That's very cool.
Alton asked him about a candlestick holder that was next to the fireplace. Apparently it was relatively unique. Alton crashed it over Harry's head and hit him several times, knocked him out.
As Alton continues to unleash his rage on Harry, Deborah follows his lead, picks up the candlestick and uses it to beat Marlene to death.
Physiologically, when we look at what was going on with them, with any kind of addiction, in this case an addiction to murder, mayhem, and rape, certain neurotransmitters are released. Shoot or kill or rape another person. That was good. Do it again.
Marlene is dead. Harry is alive but badly beaten.
Alton and Deborah ransacks the home, takes the jewelry and the car.
Alton and Deborah are on the move. They begin driving north toward Waukegan, Illinois.
They abandoned that car and got on the train. They got off the train in Evanston, Illinois.
Evanston lies just 30 miles south of Waukegan and is where Alton grew up.
This is where all their resources were. They go back to a place that is familiar, that feels like home, in order to build themselves back up, have some level of comfort, and then go back out into the world and create more mayhem.
But what Alton failed to plan is what to do if they were caught. A move that will prove costly.
Alton was crossing the street there in Evanston, and a guy that he went to high school with in Waukegan recognized him and called the local police.
Police are dispatched to the area, but the two are gone. Then they're spotted in a nearby park. Rather than go out guns blazing, Deborah follows Alton's lead as he helplessly throws his hands up.
By the time that they were arrested, that they were just tired. They put up no resistance.
The couple's arrest brings an end to their reign of terror. During their 7-week crime spree across 3 states, Deborah and Alton are suspected of killing 8 people.
The amount of death and destruction that Alton and Deborah left behind in 7 weeks is unbelievable. 8 murders, 7 rapes, 15 individuals that they either robbed or terrified or injured in some way.
So this is really fascinating when we look back at Deborah's life. Here's a young woman growing up in a family. There's absolutely no history of violence that she's perpetrated in any way, but yet when she meets Alton, she makes this flip and becomes a serial killer with absolutely no remorse.
But prosecutors choose their cases wisely and only charge the duo with the crimes for which they will be sentenced to death. No other charges are brought against them. In Indiana, both Alton and Deborah are sentenced to death for the murder of 7-year-old Tamika Turks. In Ohio, the couple is sentenced to death for killing Marlene Walters. Through it all, Deborah has Alton's back to the bitter end.
Deborah showed no remorse towards any of the victims. The only person that she cared about was Alton. She testified in the penalty phases of his trial that she had done all the murders and he hadn't done any.
When we see couples involved in crime and they get caught at the end of their spree, quite often they turn on one another. The foundation of that love was not strong to begin with. But Deborah wants to make sure that nothing happens to Alton. And I think this speaks purely of the fact that she loved him more than she loved herself.
Alton is extradited to Illinois, where he is convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of 9-year-old Vernita Wheat. After serving 17 years in prison, Alton Coleman was put to death for his crimes. Willing to take the fall for her man, Deborah Brown took her devotion to the extreme. In Wilmington, Delaware, Shakira Wanham will execute a devious plan to keep her beloved living the high life. Growing up poor in the worst part of the city, Shakira Wanham's childhood was far from idyllic.
Shakira was born when I was 17 and a half. Shakira's father, he wasn't a good provider. I was the one that was working.
He was an alcoholic. He had serious mental health issues. In fact, he was bipolar.
Shakira's father's volatile personality makes her home life extremely unstable.
Shakira's father was a violent man, and he was abusive towards her mother.
When she see that he would put his hands on me, Shakira would try to pick up something and hit him to protect me.
She witnessed abuse all the time when she was a child.
One such event, on New Year's Eve, proves to be a defining moment in 5-year-old Shakira's life.
Shakira's father came in the house after having a hard night of drinking and started arguing with me about something.
The father goes into the kitchen, comes back with a steak knife, and goes after her.
And he stabbed me in the back. Then he pulled it out and came at my heart and then came at my throat. And Shakira was standing right next to me watching everything happen.
Despite a punctured lung, Deneen survives the attack. She returns home 2 days later, but will need the next 8 months to heal. The incident is burned into Shakira's psyche, and it will pave the way for all of her male relationships to come.
When we see a child who's exposed to violence, then that violence becomes part of their lives. Either they choose someone who's very violent in order to live with later on in life, or they perpetrate that violence.
Get off of me! Get off of me!
She was unprepared for what was about to occur.
If it wasn't for love, Shakira would have never committed this act.
At 5 years old, Shakira Wanham witnesses her father brutally attack her mother, Deneen, with a knife. After 8 months of recovery at home, Deneen survives and cuts him out of their life for good. With her dad out of the picture, Shakira blossoms.
She did well in school. She had good grades. She got A's and B's.
Shakira was very smart. She wanted to be an obstetrician or gynecologist. Shakira had a lot of dreams.
But Shakira's dreams are quickly interrupted. Over the next 10 years, she watches helplessly as her mother is abused by a string of men. Shakira starts looking for an escape.
She was 11 years old when she started running away from her house. She would pack her clothes and sneak out at night when her mom was asleep.
She would sneak out windows. She would sneak out fire escapes. She always managed to get out.
Shakira's late-night excursions expose her to a dark world on the streets.
She would meet up with boys. They'd give her drugs and alcohol, and she would have sex with them.
Shakira certainly wasn't able to make rational decisions about life, and certainly she was at risk to these predator type of individuals who saw her as being very vulnerable.
By the time Shakira is 17, she has been living on and off the streets for a number of years and is addicted to drugs. Deneen tries to get her daughter help and sends her to various drug treatment programs.
Shakira spent 3/4 of her life in treatment centers because I was trying to find out what was going on with her. She did succeed in those treatment centers, but when she came home a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, she would do the same thing.
But all of that changes when 23-year-old charmer Stephen Martin sets his sights on Shakira.
Shakira saw Stephen on the street, and somehow they ended up talking.
Within days, they're inseparable. Unlike all other men in her life, Stephen showers her with affection.
She had a good time with him. He treated her like she wanted to be treated.
I think Shakira felt as though she had someone in her life that is finally showing her some attention, and she just gravitated towards it.
Stephen is a well-known drug dealer, but to Shakira, he acts like nothing but a prince. So when he asks her to move in with him just 2 months after they meet, Shakira thinks she's finally found everything she's wanted.
He would run her bath water, fix food for her. She didn't think a guy could treat her that way. And she was gonna do everything she could not to let it go.
But that feeling doesn't last. Not long after the two start playing house, Shakira learns that her guardian angel is actually a devil in disguise. All the money Stephen makes from dealing has one purpose: to support his addiction to a street drug called wet.
Wet is a drug concoction where you take a regular cigarette and dip it in PCP. So individuals, sometimes they become very, very violent. At other times, they even become psychotic.
Suddenly, the affection that Shakira has been desperately craving is now coming at a much steeper price than she ever imagined.
He became abusive. There was times that he would ask her to do something, and when she didn't want to or she couldn't, he would start hitting her.
Shakira stayed in this very abusive relationship with Stephen because in many ways, she wanted that old Stephen, the one who made her feel very special. And she held out hope against hope that she could bring that back in him.
She wanted to do everything she possibly could to please this person.
When Shakira met Stephen, she had no idea that she would end up in jail.
17-year-old Shakira Wanham is 4 months into a relationship with 23-year-old Steve Martin, a street hustler who's addicted to drugs.
Stephen, he would beat her up. He would tell her, do this, do that. You know, he would verbally abuse her.
She was afraid that something would happen to her or her family if she did not do what she was told to do.
Stephen's dramatic personality change is bad enough, but things are about to get even worse. 4 months into their relationship, Stephen is high on wet and craving more.
Stephen said, I need money. I need you to rob somebody. Because, you know, you're young. You wouldn't get into as much trouble as I would if I was to do it.
He took the gun that he carried with him all the time and wiped his prints off of it, handed it to her, and said, I want you to go get me some money.
Stephen taught her how to use the gun and said, don't ever let anyone take the gun from you because they'll take it and use it on you. She was just very, very afraid, and she just wanted to bring something back to him so that she wouldn't get beat up again.
Later that night, Shakira contacts the easiest target she can think of. A local street pharmacist named Johnny Jackson.
He was a drug dealer, and so she assumed he would have money on him.
Shakira tells Johnny she's looking to score some drugs, and he agrees to pick her up in a nearby neighborhood.
Johnny had gotten a ride from a woman named Alicia who had brought her 4-year-old son, who was sitting in the back in a car seat.
Shakira climbs into the car.
Shakira goes forward with the plan, even though there's a young child in the back of the car. This really shows how committed that she is to Stephen. For a lot of other people, this would have been a game changer. But for Shakira, she knew that she had to do this in order to hold on to the love of this man.
They went to another house for the drug transaction, and then they got on the freeway and headed out. There was music on, which was very loud, and both Alicia and Johnny were singing.
Clutching the gun in her purse, Shakira knows it's either now or never. She pulls out the gun and tells Alicia to stop the car.
And said, give me your money. And Johnny said, what?
Shut up, Johnny. Just give me your money. I know you got cash on you.
But Johnny's not about to let a 17-year-old get the jump on him.
He went to reach for the gun.
That's when it clicked in her mind what Stephen was teaching her. Don't ever let someone take the gun from you because they'll take it and use it on you. She was afraid.
It was a very surreal thing for her. She closed her eyes. The next thing you know, the gun was going off.
When she opened her eyes, she saw blood.
She saw Johnny slumped over.
Johnny is dead. His friend Alicia has been shot in the arm, but Alicia's 4-year-old son makes it through the blasts unharmed.
Shakira was shocked because she didn't mean to kill anyone.
Shakira told Alicia to take her son and go, and they did.
Shakira fights her instinct to run. She knows she can't leave without getting what Stephen wants.
Shakira then went through his pockets, taking $50 and his cell phone.
She was obviously bloody, very scared, very panicky, crying, hysterical.
Shakira thought she was going to get more than $50 from him. She was concerned because everything went bad.
Shakira must have felt awful, if not downright foolish, because she ended up killing this man for just a few dollars.
A panicked Shakira knows she has to get as far away from the tragic scene as she can.
She ended up hitchhiking and getting dropped off at a gas station by Stephen's home. And she ran to the home from there and told Stephen what happened.
There was a big argument between the two.
He said, the only thing I wanted you to do was just rob somebody and bring me some money.
He was thinking he's gonna get me, he's gonna abuse me, he's gonna hit me.
But there's no time for Stephen to lash out. When Shakira tells him that she let Alicia and her young son go, Stephen knows it's only a matter of time before police track Shakira down. And he doesn't want to be anywhere near Wilmington when they do. So Stephen jumps into action.
He had her take her clothes because they had blood on them and put them in a bag and poured bleach on it. And then drove to New Jersey and they burned her clothes.
Shakira might have felt that Stephen was helping hide the evidence because he still loved her on some level, but the reality may simply be that he provided the murder weapon and was simply covering his own tracks.
Next, Stephen and Shakira flee. 3 hours later, the emotionally exhausted couple arrive at the home of a friend of Stephen's in New Jersey, where they fall asleep. But when Shakira wakes up in the morning, Stephen is gone.
It was a pure shock for her. And I think part of that was the fear of, how am I going to deal with this situation without him? He's always told me what to do. How am I going to get through this?
And there's only one person Shakira can truly trust. Her mom, who she hasn't spoken to in 6 months.
When I got a phone call about 1 in the morning, obviously I was happy to hear from her. And she said, well, Mom, I'm gonna come home. I said, well, good, well, come on home.
Shakira hitchhikes from New Jersey back to her mom's house in Wilmington.
She was very frail, eyes sunken in, and just very, very tiny. I gave her a hug, and she said, Mom, I'm just tired. And then she laid down in her room and went to sleep.
5 hours later, Deneen is awakened by the sound of police pounding on the door.
Ma'am, we're looking for Shakira.
The detective asked me, was my daughter home? And at that point is when I went to look for her. I didn't see her at all in the home. I didn't know where Shakira was at that point. I didn't know.
Shakira may be missing, but her secret is about to see the cold light of day.
When I found out everything that happened, and I almost passed out.
"17-year-old Shakira Wanham lands on her mother's doorstep after committing a robbery for her man, Stephen Martin, that ends in murder. 5 hours later, police come looking for Shakira.
I go open the door, and it's the police, and I'm shocked. They said, is your daughter Shakira at home? And I said, she was here, yes.
Shakira!
When I went to look for her, I didn't see my daughter.
Deneen demands to know what police want with Shakira. When she is told her daughter is wanted for murder, Deneen is floored.
Check the premise.
This tore my heart. This ripped my heart out. That's my firstborn.
Armed with a search warrant, the officers hunt through every room, but find no sign of Shakira. Eventually, they find her huddled in an attic corner.
Well, one officer said, here she is. They lifted her up and handcuffed her.
Police haul Shakira away for questioning, where she gives up everything to police, including the man who put her up to it.
She said Stephen asked Shakira to rob for him after giving her some drugs. If she didn't do what he wanted her to do, he would beat her again.
And they went to his home and found ammunition. And that's when they found him and arrested him.
Stephen admits to giving Shakira a gun, but vehemently denies having anything to do with the murder. He is arrested and convicted of a weapons-related violation, but faces no charges in the murder of Johnny Jackson. Stephen is sentenced and serves only 2 years in prison.
This was something that was an emotional assault to her because after all, she was just following his commands and trying to help him get money so that he can do drugs. Shakira committed this murder in order to please Stephen.
At the end of the day, it was Shakira's fault that Johnny Jackson lost his life. And Shakira knows that.
A little over a year later, Shakira faces a jury for her crimes, and she tells them that she's remorseful for her actions.
During trial, Shakira stated that she wished she could change places with Johnny. She feels very, very bad about what happened.
She expressed sorrow for the family and the people she'd hurt.
Shakira is convicted of 1 count of murder in the first degree and receives life in prison plus 17 years. On appeal, Shakira's lawyers argue against her conviction, citing her traumatic upbringing and age as mitigating factors. She is resentenced to 21 years.
She fortunately will have a life when she gets out of jail because she was so young. So she'll be able to make her way back into society.
Today, Shakira has changed from the naive teen who killed in the name of love to a mature woman with a message.
The main thing that Shakira wants now is for people to learn from her mistake.
They say, find a man that treats you like a queen, who showers you with love, attention, and the finer things in life. But what if your king begins to lose the throne? The kingdom you've built together begins to crumble. Would you get out while you still can? Or stay by his side as everything falls apart? 1995, Elkton, Maryland. It's late Wednesday morning, and 2 state troopers are watching traffic on one of the town's main roads.
So the police were out patrolling the streets as they usually do.
Suddenly, a sedan with New York plates speeds past.
The vehicle was going well above the speed limit.
So the police turned on their sirens and pursued the vehicle.
Fortunately, the driver pulls over without incident.
They asked to see his driver's license.
In reviewing the young man's ID, the troopers learn he is 27-year-old Alan Tate, and he lives 140 miles away in Brooklyn, New York.
Alan Tate, he's just acting suspiciously.
During the traffic stop, Alan was visibly nervous, almost panicking.
When the troopers ask to see Alan's vehicle registration, they notice something even more alarming.
When Alan reached for his registration, the officer saw a little baggie of white powder.
Then those antennas go up, and then cops thinking something's not right.
The troopers order Alan to get out of the car.
Cop brings him out, searches the vehicle, and then bingo.
In the trunk of the car, they find a black bag full of cash, drug paraphernalia, and 300 grams of crack cocaine.
That's over $15,000 worth of drugs.
That amount of drugs, it's not for personal use. It's an intent to sell.
For the authorities, this traffic stop turned drug bust is only the beginning.
He's definitely working for somebody. So they want to find out who is he working for and how big of an operation this is.
But to take this case all the way to the top and catch the kingpin, authorities will need the cooperation of his queen.
She was loyal to him. She was ride or die, by his side.
"18-year-old Michelle Miles was proud to be a Brooklyn native.
Michelle grew up in the Marcy Projects, which is public housing in New York City.
These housing projects, are tight-knit.
We did a lot of singing and dancing and all those things. And when we got together, we did have fun.
Michelle was known for her warm personality.
She just had a really sweet spirit and was almost very innocent.
She's kind-hearted. She would always give me a hug. She would always make me laugh.
Life in the projects wasn't always easy, but Michelle kept her head held high.
Michelle's biological father wasn't really in the picture, so it fell really on her mother to support the family.
What you find oftentimes in the urban areas is that there's just not a whole lot of opportunities out there.
Regardless of her family's circumstances, Michelle was determined to be successful.
She was on the road to finishing high school, and she aspired to go to college.
Michelle wanted to be able to take care of herself as well as her family.
One afternoon, Michelle met a fellow Marcy Projects resident that would change her life forever. 30-year-old Stanley Burrell.
We were sitting outside, me and a few friends on a bench. He happened to come in the direction where we were. And he was like, "Can I talk to you for a second?" And I was like, "Me?"
Michelle was stunned by the older man's attention. Stanley had a reputation around the neighborhood.
His name was out there. Everybody was talking about him, girls, guys, whoever.
All the girls wanted him. He had swag, he had clout, he had it all.
That's kind of what attracted me to him.
Rumor had it that Stanley didn't exactly get his money the legal way. But Michelle was still smitten.
We knew he a drug dealer, he got money.
Drug dealing wasn't necessarily frowned upon in the neighborhood. Sometimes it's revered. It's kind of reinforced from all angles. We have it in our music, we have it in our TV.
Stanley told Michelle he'd had his eye on her for a while.
He was like, "Oh, I heard you ain't got no man. You need somebody to take care of you." I guess it reeled me in.
Stanley was very smooth in his approach. Him being older and more mature, it coaxes her, it massages her self-esteem.
When Stanley asked to take Michelle out on a date, she jumped at the opportunity.
Someone such as Stanley, the second that person speaks to you, you don't lose out on the opportunity. It could be a once-in-a-lifetime shot.
Stanley took her to a movie, a nice dinner, very romantic.
He laid it on thick, gave her the love, showed her all the things that she wanted.
No man had ever treated Michelle the way this man did. He treated her just like a princess.
Stanley may have made Michelle feel like a princess when he wined and dined her. But in the bedroom, he made her feel like a queen.
I thought it was amazing. I really did, because he did things to me that I was like, okay, I never had that done.
The attraction between the two of them, it was magnetic.
Here was this man who told her she was beautiful, told her he wanted to be with her, and she fell in love, and she fell hard.
Soon, the couple took their relationship to the next level. Michelle moved in with Stanley, and her entire lifestyle changed.
I saw, from her not having anything to having things now. Like nice clothes, nice sneakers.
I stayed with the latest of whatever they had at the time.
She was like the queen of the projects. My man is Stan. He's the guy who runs things. So it actually gave her a badge of honor.
But Michelle didn't realize that badge of honor would one day make her a target and force her to choose between her freedom or her man. February 8th, 1995. Maryland state troopers have just discovered drugs in the trunk of Alan Tate's car.
There's scales, there's packaging, and there's also money.
This wasn't just some random guy's drug stash. This guy's a drug courier.
The state troopers take Alan into custody.
The police know that if he's the one transporting the drugs, he's working for somebody. Their next objective is to find out who he's working for.
Back at the station, Maryland police have gotten the FBI involved.
They know this is a bigger operation, so the feds come in.
When the police see someone carrying this big of amount of drugs, they consider it a really big deal.
When FBI agents sit down with Alan Tate, it doesn't take long for him to crack.
He says he's just the driver, and the people that they really should be looking for are Stanley Burrell and Michelle Miles.
As Alan starts to tell his story, he'll launch a 2-year undercover operation to take down one of New York's biggest drug rings and reveal the tumultuous relationship at the center of it all.
So this couple thought that they were untouchable, that they were above the law.
In 1990, 18-year-old Michelle Miles fell hard for 30-year-old rumored drug dealer Stanley Burrell.
He was a lot older than her. Michelle was young, but she loved him. That was her man.
He enticed me. He told me, oh, I could take care of you. And I said, oh, maybe there's some truth to that.
The guys that are hustling, you know, selling drugs, they have the swag, they have the juice.
He gave her gifts, gave her a sense of self as well as support.
In the project, they was considered the king and queen.
But Michelle would soon learn the flashy new lifestyle her man afforded her came at a price.
Michelle had no idea that her newfound love was about to cost her everything.
February 8th, 1995. FBI agents are sitting down with 27-year-old Alan Tate.
His vehicle was searched, and they discovered 300 grams of crack cocaine.
It's clear to cops that Alan is just a driver. So what they want to know now is, who's running the show?
Alan Tate was claiming to be a courier for Stanley Burrell and his girlfriend, Michelle Miles.
Alan claims to have a wealth of information about Stanley and Michelle.
He claims that in addition to working with the couple, he was actually good friends with them as well.
Alan explains Stanley had been involved in the drug game for a while before he started dating Michelle. But eventually, Stanley decided to introduce Michelle into the business.
Alan remembers one night where he and some of the other members of the organization were in a Brooklyn apartment that was not too far away from the projects. This is pretty much a trap house. They were dividing drugs and packaging them for distribution.
At one point, Stanley showed up with Michelle.
So I went into the room and I seen the drugs.
Stan explained to her that that was crack cocaine. And in the other pile, there was heroin.
According to Alan, Michelle seemed taken aback.
She'd heard some rumors, but he had never brought her around the organization.
I never seen it, nor was I around it. I've never seen it up close like that.
Alan says then Stanley requested something from Michelle that no one expected.
Stanley asked me if I would help him package the drugs. And I was like, are you serious?
Michelle was in total shock. This was a huge leap into Stanley's reality.
Alan says Stanley began to coax Michelle and assure her that everything would be okay.
He told her to trust him. He wouldn't let anything happen to her, but he needed her help.
She had a major sense of loyalty to him to stick by his side.
Eventually, Michelle conceded to her man.
I gave in because I was in love with him. I'm gonna do what I can to keep him.
Alan tells detectives that he saw a turn in Michelle that night.
When she first got there, she was scared, she was nervous. By the end of the night, she was packaging drugs like a pro.
She would do whatever he asked her to do, with no questions about it.
I was ride or die.
With Stanley's guidance, Michelle gradually became a key player in the organization.
Stanley taught me to purchase drugs. He taught me to cook them, and he taught me to package them as well.
She was called the Master Chef. She was called the Get Money Chick.
In fact, Alan claims Michelle became the one keeping track of all the money.
His friends collected the money. After they did that, the money would come to me.
Alan says Stanley was giving Michelle a solid cut of their profits.
He gave me $1,100 a week. Making that $1,100 a week was very appealing to me at that age.
They was king and queen. Everybody knew they had money. They running everything.
But according to Alan, by the summer of 1994, there started to be trouble in paradise for the couple.
I found out that Stan is messing with someone else.
Alan says it all came to a head one night at the trap house.
Suddenly, Michelle burst through the door and is asking, "Where's Stanley? Where's Stanley?"
They're trying to tell her that he wasn't there.
But Michelle made a beeline for the bedroom.
I go to the back, and then I caught them. So we start fighting. And then he come and trying to pull us apart. He eventually separated us.
Alan says things only escalated from there.
I knew where he kept his weapon. So I went and got the gun. He knew I knew how to use the gun because he taught me how to shoot. I'm like, walk, bitch.
After the woman left, Michelle was still clearly distraught.
I'm sick. Like, I'm really literally like sick. Like, how could he do this? He was trying to talk to me. I didn't want to hear anything he had to say. Words wouldn't even come out my mouth at that point.
But Alan says as Stanley continued to beg for forgiveness from Michelle, her demeanor changed.
He said whatever to convince me not to leave him. And I stayed with him, even after that. I didn't want to lose whatever we had.
She didn't want to lose the connection that she had with Stanley. He was not only a friend, a lover, he was her everything.
Men like Stanley, they manipulate and they take advantage of you for their own benefit. She loved him authentically. He really just wanted to use her as bait to help him make money, to help him survive.
Alan claims Stanley continued to sleep around on Michelle and even got another woman pregnant. But Michelle still stayed faithful.
I was doing everything against all that I saw, and I still continued to stay in that relationship. At no point I didn't break my loyalty to him, no matter how angry I had become with him. It was easier to stay than to walk away.
Alan says their drug operation grew bigger and bigger, despite the tumultuous relationship between Stanley and Michelle.
Michelle happened to be right alongside of Stan, organizing, cutting up. She is the queen pin.
He had a lot of people working for him. While he wasn't around, he kind of like had me in control of who got what and when. And whatever went out, I had to keep a mental note. And he would know from me what was where and if it was running low.
With Alan's statement in tow, investigators decide to move in on Stanley and Michelle. But nabbing the pillars of this drug operation will prove easier said than done.
She wasn't about to turn him in. She's willing to risk it all to stay with him.
Looking for love in all the wrong places. You end up wanting to be with this person, or a person is giving you some attention and the attention that you've lacked your entire life. And now someone is promising you a future. And they end up taking you somewhere that you've never thought that you would end up. She was really misguided into a lifestyle that wasn't something that she would have done on her own.
95. The FBI is investigating a Brooklyn drug operation run by Kingpin Stanley Burrell and his girlfriend, Michelle Miles.
Michelle was functioning kind of as Stanley's office or business manager.
Michelle helped essentially cook and package, then track the money and the product of Stanley's whole operation.
Law enforcement was tipped off to the couple after apprehending Alan Tate. He was actually one of the drug couriers who was caught delivering crack cocaine.
Now that Alan has told all, federal and local authorities launch a major investigation of the drug ring based inside the Marcy houses. Determined to get Michelle and her man, the task force puts the community under heavy surveillance.
The feds have so much and so many resources. They will set up cameras over by traffic lights. They will bug payphones, surveillance through helicopters. When the feds are following you, it's unlimited.
The police are arresting as many associates of Stanley and Michelle as they can to get those key witness statements.
Every time that someone was picked up from the Marcy houses, Stanley's name came up. His name just kept coming up.
It doesn't take long for word of the investigation to filter back to Stanley.
It was a well-known fact within the projects that Stanley was under investigation and the feds were looking for him.
Stanley, he was high, and
Stanley is always on the move. He's always staying in different places, trying to stay ahead of the investigation.
Yet even with Stanley lying low and the Marcy houses buzzing with word that the feds are gunning for him, Stanley assures Michelle that she isn't in danger.
He told me the feds wasn't looking for me, they was looking for him.
In order for Stanley to stay low, he sends Michelle out to do his drug runs for him.
He asked me to go uptown to purchase the drugs. My life was going downhill from there. I knew I was allowing a lot of that stuff in my life, but I still kept going. So I said, okay, I'll go.
She would sacrifice herself if she had to please her man.
Little did Michelle know, she was being watched. The next morning, with this new surveillance in tow, the feds are finally ready to act.
The FBI feel they have enough information and they're ready to close the investigation. It was time to close in on Michelle and Stanley.
As Michelle heads to her car in the fall of 1997, 2 years after the investigation began, undercover agents are waiting outside her home.
I see this car that's parked outside. I said something strange about this vehicle because the only people who parked on that block was the people that live there.
Moments later, the agents make their move.
2 people jump out, guns pointing at everything. And I'm looking like, oh, I'm gonna get kidnapped.
But in the next instant, Michelle realizes these are no kidnappers.
They pulled their badges out. That's when I knew I'm going to jail.
They immediately have her put her hands behind her back and they place her under arrest.
Now that they have Michelle in custody, the agents press her to give up her boyfriend, the kingpin of the drug operation, Stanley Burrell.
I'm sitting there, they questioning me, where's Stanley? So they was like, you need to tell us if he in there.
Their main objective is to get to Stanley.
In the fall of 1997, federal agents have just arrested 25-year-old Michelle Miles outside her Brooklyn apartment for her participation in an extensive drug trafficking operation. Now that they have Michelle in custody, investigators' priority is locating her man and kingpin of the organization, 37-year-old Stanley Burrell.
They had reason to believe he was somewhere in the house where they just arrested Michelle.
But when police ask Michelle to tell them where Stanley is hiding inside, she refuses to cooperate.
I said, you got all the wrong information. I haven't seen him. Even though I know they know, and he was right in the house.
Law enforcement pressured her into pointing them in Stan's direction.
They said, this is your last chance to tell us, because we're going to go in there, we're going to go in there with force.
But Michelle doesn't budge.
Said, if that's what you're going to do, that's what you're going to do.
Even in the process of being arrested, there still was that sense of loyalty. You know, I'm riding for him.
With Michelle refusing to give in, authorities take a position outside the townhome and prepare for entry.
They were preparing essentially for the worst. Stanley could be armed and dangerous.
Authorities bust open the door and rush inside.
They did not see him immediately anywhere inside the house, so they decided to do a sweep of the home.
They eventually found him hiding upstairs in a closet.
Moments later, agents escort a handcuffed Stanley to the police cruiser.
They bring him out, sit him in the same vehicle that I'm in. He didn't know I was in there until he got in.
The stakes are high in this situation, but Stanley seems calm.
He didn't even have to say to me, Michelle, don't say anything, because he already knew I wouldn't.
Instead, all Stanley says is for Michelle not to worry.
Stanley was nonchalant about it. Like, they ain't got nothing. We good. They got nothing.
It's true. Law enforcement doesn't find any drugs inside Stanley and Michelle's home.
When you go to lock up a kingpin, you know there's not going to be any drugs there.
However, the search does uncover a different treasure trove of evidence.
They find stacks of cash. They found records of sales going back about 7 years.
Every kingpin, every major drug operation has to document the money. Who's owed, who needs to be paid. They're coded, but they're not too hard to decipher.
And they also found pictures of Stanley and his crew posing with money and with jewels and cars and showing off the fruits of their labor.
Before the morning's over, many of the people pictured will be in police custody.
Michelle and Stanley were among 16 people arrested.
After their search of the home, federal agents head back to the station and prepare to interview their suspects. They begin with Stanley.
Stanley doesn't say very much, kind of takes the position that, listen, that money that you found, I earned that money working on cars. I'm a mechanic, and this is how I made my living.
The agents don't believe a word of it.
They know Stanley is the head of the operation.
You had a bunch of men who pointed Stanley as the ringleader.
They also had surveillance of Stanley with known members of that drug ring.
As time moved on, Stanley asked for an attorney. All discussions are off.
With Stanley remaining tight-lipped, they hope they'll have better luck in their talk with Michelle.
The hopes is that she will turn on her boyfriend and give up information on Stanley.
When it's Michelle's turn in the hot seat, will she tell all? Or will she protect her man?
'Cause
The feds told me, we know you know everything about Stanley Burrell and his organization, and if you tell us, we'll let you go.
She was being offered an opportunity and an outlet.
She has to make an incredibly difficult decision. She's either going to protect herself or protect her man.
In the fall of 1997, 25-year-old Michelle Miles and her boyfriend, Stanley Burrell, are both in federal custody.
This was pursuant to a NYPD and FBI joint task force targeted drug ring that was allegedly run by Michelle and Stanley.
When federal agents questioned Stanley, he denied everything.
Stanley maintains his innocence when questioned by law enforcement. He said, "I've never sold drugs, and if I was a drug dealer, why didn't you find any drugs in my home?"
Now, authorities are hoping they'll have better luck with Michelle.
They also know that Michelle is a big part of the operation, and she's probably privy to most of the information as far as how the operation works. So the object is to separate her, put her in a room, and apply pressure.
Once in the room with Michelle, the agents hold nothing back.
They tell Michelle they know that she's cooked, packaged, and handled money for Stanley, and has gone on drug runs for him.
They inform her they have someone who's willing to testify that he was carrying drugs for Stanley and them.
That someone is drug courier turned informant Alan Tate, the man whose arrest triggered the entire investigation.
He made it out as if he worked for them, that he had a position within that organization, that he'd made trips on behalf of Michelle and Stanley.
They lay that on her. They tell her what she's dealing with, what she's facing.
This isn't like when you're busted for possession. Michelle was busted for a massive interstate drug conspiracy.
It's federal. Feds will put you away for life.
But even as the agents apply pressure, they also offer Michelle a way out by giving up Stanley.
They told me that they didn't want me. They wanted him. So if I helped them, they would let me go.
Given the circumstances, it's a tempting offer.
Michelle finds herself at crossroads, facing the biggest decision of her life. Protect myself, protect my man.
To investigators' surprise, Michelle remains faithful to Stanley.
My response was that where we came from, we don't snitch. I felt I needed to do that for my man.
This was her guy. This is her person. This was the love of her life. She was going to support him and she was going to ride for him.
Michelle's refusal to cooperate is a bitter disappointment for the agents who spent 2 years building the case against Stanley.
They thought they was going to break me, and they didn't.
After letting Michelle stew in a holding cell for several days, federal prosecutors approach her with one last offer.
They would allow her to plead guilty to a lesser charge if she in turn testified against Stanley.
Michelle's public defender urges her to take the deal. But once again, Michelle shocks everyone.
She'd refused to go along with the plea deal.
Not only does she say no, she fires her attorney.
I ended up petitioning the court to relieve the counsel that was on my case because he was telling that it was in my best interest that I cooperate, and I still was protecting my man.
She wouldn't give in. You know, she wouldn't save herself. She would rather save him than save herself.
Despite the things that she had been through in her past for Stanley. Michelle did so much to stay loyal to her man that didn't even stop after she was arrested.
Stanley, also in jail awaiting trial, coaxes Michelle to continue to keep quiet.
Me and Stanley, we sent letters back and forth. He was always like, I love you, you're gonna be okay, I have your best interest at heart, don't worry, everything is gonna work itself out. They have nothing, this is all I've heard from the beginning. You're gonna be fine, you're gonna get out. They're not gonna convict you.
The person she trusts the most, Stanley, is really guiding her.
I didn't break my loyalty to him. So now, I guess I have to fight.
But is Michelle making a grave mistake?
Michelle's welfare wasn't something that really crossed his mind.
He had some type of mind control over her.
Stan just wanted to be aware of the moves that were being made by Michelle.
But he wasn't in love with her. You can't be in love with a woman and put her in that situation. You can love someone because of the person that they are. But if you're in love with someone, you would never put them in harm's way. So there's no way that he could have possibly been in love with her. Not by a long shot.
Miles and her 39-year-old boyfriend, Stanley Burrell, go on trial together in federal court.
They were both charged with conspiracy to distribute heroin and crack cocaine.
If convicted under some of these conspiracy-type statutes, you were looking at long sentences.
Despite facing as much as life in prison, Michelle has refused repeated offers of reduced charges if she would agree to testify against Stanley.
In spite all of that had happened, Michelle was still in love with Stanley and still protecting her man.
This girl was loyal until the end. She couldn't see what was being done to her.
Stanley convinced me that I wouldn't get convicted.
In reality, the odds are stacked against Michelle and Stanley.
To help make his case, the prosecutor had documents, mountains of photographic evidence, a witness in Alan Tate, who was willing to testify against both Stanley and Michelle, and get a deal.
Many of the people arrested alongside Stanley and Michelle, their associates, runners, and lookouts, also take the stand.
Almost everybody turned on Stanley except Michelle.
In the end, Michelle's faith in Stanley proves misguided.
The final verdict was guilty on all counts.
Stanley didn't show any emotion, but Michelle, she was heartbroken.
I felt like my life was over. It didn't seem real at all. I thought it was a bad dream and I was gonna wake up from it, but I knew it was real.
When the judge reads Michelle her sentence, it's clear her nightmare is only just beginning.
She got 360 months, which equates to 30 years.
I could scream because I said, how do I get 30 years in prison? How?
When it's Stanley's turn for sentencing, the judge doesn't go easy on the kingpin either.
He was sentenced to life in prison.
Michelle's refusal to testify against him and cooperate with the prosecutors essentially was for nothing because Stanley still got the most severe punishment.
Now neither of them would be free.
From behind bars, and with the gravity of her sentence weighing on her, Michelle finally starts to break free from Stanley's grasp.
I just felt like, Michelle, you have to separate yourself from him. Because this man is gonna be the death of you. Look at what I'm going through right now. Had I not continued on in this relationship, I wouldn't be here.
In 2016, after 19 years behind bars, Michelle gets an opportunity for a second chance at freedom.
President Obama launched the Clemency Project. It allows qualified federal inmates to petition to have their sentences commuted.
This program was aimed to help non-violent drug offenders just like Michelle.
Michelle works with a pro bono attorney to apply for the program. And in May of that year, she receives an official response signed by President Obama.
The letter said that you are a prime example of rehabilitation. and therefore I granted you clemency. I screamed. A huge weight was lifted that day.
Since her release, Michelle hasn't missed a beat in rebuilding her life.
I'm so proud of her because she came home and she got right on her feet.
Michelle is in a healthy relationship. She has her own place. She's gainfully employed.
Right now, I work for a nonprofit organization that deals with formerly incarcerated individuals.
She has taken control of her life and she's making healthy choices and she's understanding her worth and she loves herself.
Đầu anh thì đầu anh xem đi. Mẹ lại thêm một ngày ức chế. Khỏi ăn lẩu nữa. Có thế đại là nó không làm lẩu xứng nữa. Mà trong Nam liên quan gì nữa. Thế mà tí làm cái gì? Ai biết, nếu mà trời đâu. Đi chả đá ấy, nhà chị Hương ấy, xong gặp nó với cả Nghiêm, trông 203. Chồng vô công rồi nghề vậy. 203 năm nay bao nhiêu tuổi nhỉ? 21 tuổi à? Có tí với anh Đại. 21 tuổi. Anh ơi trông nhớ mắt vậy. Kiểu nhà trả vô công rồi nghề trả làm được cái gì? Chuyện gì? Vẫn báo cảnh. Chị Quỳnh đi nước ngoài giữ nguyên được nhỉ? Kiểu giữ nguyên một người rất lâu ấy. Nên tao không phải tranh chấp như này đâu. Đéo gì lúc đấy bố em lúc đấy nhá, kiểu có bố của cái đứa Thảo không? Phương Thảo lên ấy. Thế xong lúc bố em về xong mấy người đấy bảo là bố em lên làm trưởng không? Thế xong bố em làm xong mẹ nhà đấy gặp em bên ngoài còn chửi em á. Má chửi đéo gì? Ê còn khịa kiểu thế xong cứ khịa như thế xong em tức vãi, em chửi mẹ lại luôn. Em đấu khẩu 11 xong từ lần đấy mình đéo dám nói gì nữa ấy. Xong cứ kiểu khịa là kiểu chuyện là bố em lên xong các thứ ấy. Thế con mẹ Toàn ấy cay vãi đái. Mẹ mà lúc đấy mình mới lớp mấy nhỉ? 8 à? Hay lớp 9? Thế là mẹ em bảo là nằm nốt gì đấy nghỉ luôn. Cả nhiều hôm làm rạp ấy. Bận mà. Bận vãi xong lại phải lên nhà thờ. Mà chủ nhật nào chả phải lên. Nên là mẹ em không cho đi nữa. Bắt ở nhà. Kiểu bựa thật. Nhà đấy kiểu người chân chất. Kiểu chả hiểu sao cái trước đấy có cái gì mà phải drama như thế luôn ý. Mình sẽ chuyển sang tô cái phần lông ở trên phần cổ của chú yêu cao cổ này nha. Mình sẽ tô màu nâu vào đây. Vãi bàn 170 này, trông chắc chắn không? Trông biết vậy. Biết của làm trời sao của đấy. Mừ. Gì? Ở mức à? Không phải khác nhé. Thằng này được tắt cái trạng thái hoạt động. Cút! Mỗi ngày nhớ một em sợ. Mãi thằng này cho em vào trạng thái hoạt động luôn đấy Thảo ơi. Thằng này tắt trạng thái hoạt động luôn em cho mẹ vào trong. Biết đâu nó hạn chế mày không thấy thì sao? Không phải đâu, hạn chế nó không kiểu hiện vào tin nhắn ở cái trang cá nhân này đâu. Hay là máy tính nó không hiện. Kiểm tra thử điện thoại. Ở mức quá, tao cho mày vào hạn chế trước. À quên, mình tắt trạng thái hoạt động của điện thoại mà. Lại phải bật à? Mình sẽ tô cái màu vàng nhạt vào phần lỗ tai của chú hươu cao cổ này nhá. Ê, nó tắt thật nhỉ Thảo ơi. Nhị ơi. Thằng này mày chết thì tao cho mẹ mày vào hạn chế. Anh cẩn thận đấy. Người yêu rồi đến đấy cũng hóa chia tay thôi. Gì em chặn anh sao em phải đánh? Em chia tay nhá. Thôi chia làm gì để rồi lại phải quay lại. Thôi em bảo em chia tay đi. Ăn vãi. Không bỏ hạn chế không được này. À đây. Mẹ nuôi năm nay muốn rừng mình. Ngứa đít. Thằng khác mà. Giờ chạy KPI rồi. Ê thằng Đồng cứ nhắn tin cho em liên tục ấy. Ok Đồng. Thôi. Rồi dã man quá. Lại phải đi chơi với Đồng rồi. đang làm phiền em đấy.
Sao anh làm phiền em?
Phiền em với thằng khác.
Anh làm phiền.
Thì anh.
Thì anh làm phiền.
Sao lại chưa gửi nhỉ?
Đến 1 giờ nhá.
Mẹ em này, thằng vô liêm sỉ. Anh nói gì? Anh há mồm anh nói lại em xem nào.
Anh nói gì đâu em.
Để em giải tội online cho anh. Mình đang sửa lốt cái phần da, cái phần lông này của chú á. Theo cao cổ là đã sắp xong rồi nha.